She didn't ask for anything. That's what stopped him. Every person Nathan Holloway had ever met, investors, employees, distant relatives who suddenly remembered his phone number after he made his first million, they all wanted something. They smiled first, then reached out their hand. But this woman walked out of a restaurant hungry rather than accept help from a stranger. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, didn't know that the man who had destroyed her life was already planning to finish what he started. He just knew he couldn't look away. If this story moves you, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The afternoon Nathan Holloway first saw Claire Bennett, he was having one of the worst lunches of his life. Not because of the food at Riverside Terrace was excellent. It was the kind of place that charged $40 for a plate of pasta and somehow made you feel like you'd gotten a deal. The problem was the company. Across the table from him sat Derek Wills, a venture capitalist who wore his watch on the outside of his shirt cuff and laughed too loudly at his own jokes. Derek had been talking for 45 minutes about a real estate deal in Miami that Nathan had already decided he wasn't interested in, and Nathan had spent most of that time nodding at appropriate intervals while his mind wandered to the stack of reports waiting on his desk back at Holloway Consulting. The numbers speak for themselves, Derek was saying, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. You put in $8 million now, and in 3 years, Derek, Nathan set down his water glass. I appreciate the pitch. I do. But I'm going to pass. Derek's knife stopped mid-cut. You haven't even seen the full projections. I've seen enough. Nathan kept his voice even. He'd learned years ago that softening a no just gave people something to argue with. It's not the right fit for what we're building right now. That was when he saw her. She was standing at the host's podium near the entrance, a woman in her early 30s, wearing a gray blazer that was a season or two old, clean but slightly worn at the cuffs. Her hair was pulled back in a low knot, and she was studying the menu board posted near the door with the focused intensity of someone doing actual math in their head. Nathan noticed her the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit its surroundings. Riverside Terrace attracted a specific kind of customer. People who booked reservations 2 weeks in advance, who knew the sommelier's name, who didn't check prices before ordering. This woman was checking prices, every single one. He watched her face move through a series of small, almost imperceptible calculations. Her jaw tightened slightly. Her eyes moved to the lunch specials, then to the regular menu, then back to the specials. Her expression never collapsed into defeat. That was the thing that struck him. There was no self-pity in it, just the quiet, grinding mathematics of someone trying to make numbers work that weren't going to work. Derek was still talking. Nathan had completely stopped listening. The woman at the podium took one slow breath through her nose. Then she folded the menu card, set it back neatly in its stand, turned around, and walked out the door. She hadn't made a scene, hadn't complained, hadn't even let her shoulders drop. She just left. Nathan, you still with me? He pulled his attention back to the table. Derek was looking at him with mild irritation. Sorry, Nathan said. What were you saying? He thought about her for the rest of the day. That bothered him because Nathan Holloway was not the kind of man who got distracted easily. He had built his consulting company from 2 employees in a rented office space to a firm with over 200 staff across 3 cities. He had done that by being present, by staying in the room mentally, not just physically. His assistant Priya once told a reporter that Nathan had the single most focused attention span of anyone she'd ever worked for, which Nathan found embarrassing but accurate. And yet, he kept returning to the image of that woman setting the menu card back in its stand, the neatness of it, the dignity in such a small, unnecessary gesture. She could have just walked away. Instead, she made sure the card was straight. He didn't tell anyone about it. What was there to tell? I saw a woman leave a restaurant without eating, and I can't stop thinking about it. That wasn't a story. That was just something that happened on a Thursday. He drove back to the office, approved 3 contracts, sat through a 90-minute strategy call with his Portland team, and then sat at his desk for a long time staring at the city skyline through his floor-to-ceiling windows, thinking about menu cards and gray blazers, and a jaw that hadn't trembled even once. Nathan's life had a shape to it that outsiders rarely understood. From the outside, it looked like success had made things simple. He had money, which meant he had options, which meant, people assumed, that most of his problems were already solved. What they didn't account for was Marcus. Marcus Holloway was 7 years old, currently missing one front tooth, and possessed of an opinion about everything. He had opinions about which breakfast cereals were worth eating, only 2, about the correct way to fold a paper airplane, very specific, and about which of his father's ties made him look like a boring guy versus like a dad. He had recently informed Nathan that the blue-striped one was acceptable, but the burgundy one made him look like someone who works at a bank and doesn't like it. Nathan had laughed until his eyes watered. Then he had donated the burgundy tie. Marcus had been 4 when his mother, Diane, died. A brain aneurysm. Fast, unexpected, the kind of thing that happened to other people until it didn't. Nathan had spent the first year afterward running on autopilot. Wake up, get Marcus fed, get Marcus to school, work, pick up Marcus, dinner, bedtime, collapse. Repeat. Grief, he discovered, was not a single event, but 1,000 small ones stacked on top of each other until you forgot what it felt like to not be carrying something heavy. He had a night nurse for the first 2 years, a wonderful woman named Gloria, who smelled like lavender and always had a crossword puzzle going. Then Marcus started kindergarten and decided he didn't need Gloria anymore, and Nathan, who privately wasn't sure he was ready, had agreed, because you couldn't tell a 6-year-old that his father was nervous about being alone. So now it was just the 2 of them, in a 2-large house in the Montclair neighborhood, with a rotating cast of babysitters for the evenings. Nathan worked late, and a standing Sunday morning ritual of pancakes that Marcus was slowly, aggressively learning to make himself. This was Nathan's real life, not the board meetings, or the financial press, or the charity galas where people took his photo. This was it. A boy who had opinions about ties, a house with too many rooms, and a father who was still, quietly, figuring out how to be one. He saw Claire again 10 days later. It was a Saturday, which meant Marcus, which meant the park 2 blocks from their house. Caldwell Park, with its slightly uneven basketball court and the old oak tree that Marcus had decided was his personal climbing territory. Nathan sat on a bench with a coffee he'd been nursing for an hour, watching his son attempt to convince 2 other kids that his method for climbing the oak tree was definitively the best method, when he noticed the woman from the restaurant. She was sitting on a bench about 30 feet away, watching a little girl of about 5 or 6 who was pushing a doll stroller along the path with tremendous seriousness. The woman was wearing a different jacket today, navy blue, also slightly worn, and she had a paperback open in her lap, though she wasn't reading it. She was watching her daughter with the particular attentiveness of a parent who has learned to look relaxed while actually tracking every movement. Nathan knew that look. He wore it constantly. He almost didn't approach her. He ran through the reasons why he shouldn't. She didn't know him. It might seem strange. He wasn't sure what he would even say. Hey, I saw you leave a restaurant without eating, and I thought about it for a week and a half was not an opening anyone wanted to hear. But then Marcus launched himself off the bottom branch of the oak tree with a yell of pure joy, landed badly, and immediately started to cry. Not the serious crying of real injury, but the wounded pride crying of a kid who'd been showing off, and it hadn't gone the way he'd planned. Nathan was off the bench before the thought finished forming, crossing the grass in 4 strides. He crouched down beside Marcus, checked his hands, scraped, not bad, checked his knee, same, and said what he always said in these moments. Talk to me. What happened? I slipped, Marcus said, with profound indignation, as if the tree had done it on purpose. You were going too fast. I was not. Okay. Nathan pulled a travel-size first aid kit from his jacket pocket, a habit he'd developed when Marcus was about 3 and had stopped being able to go anywhere without bleeding on something, and started cleaning the scrape. You were definitely not going too fast. Dad. You're using your voice. What voice? The one where you say you agree, but your face says you don't agree. Nathan looked up. Marcus was staring at him with the flat-eyed certainty of a child who has learned to read his parent like a map. I love you very much, Nathan said, and you were going too fast. Marcus considered this, then looked down at his scraped palm with the critical assessment of someone evaluating damage. It's not that bad. No, it's not. Can I go back up? Slower. Fine. Marcus accepted the bandage Nathan pressed onto his palm, examined it, and then ran back toward the tree with no reduction in speed whatsoever. Nathan stood up, watched him go, and when he turned back toward the bench, the woman from the restaurant was watching him. Not in a strange way, more like recognition. Like she knew that scene from the inside. He nodded. She nodded back. And because Nathan Holloway had spent enough of his life letting moments pass by thinking too hard about them, he walked over. "Your son," she said, before he could figure out what to say. "Yeah." He glanced back at Marcus, who was already 3 feet up the tree. "He's going to do that again in exactly the same way in about 10 minutes. A small smile crossed her face. "Mine fell off the slide twice yesterday. Same slide. Same spot." She tilted her head toward the girl with the stroller who had stopped to crouch down and have what appeared to be a very serious conversation with her doll. "The second time she got back up and told me the slide was broken." "Was it?" "No, but I respected the framing." Nathan laughed. A real one, not the polished boardroom variety. He gestured to the space on the bench beside her. "Mind if I—" She hesitated, just for a second, but he caught it. "Sure," she said. He sat down, leaving a full half bench of space between them, and looked out at the park rather than at her. He'd learned something over the years. People talked more easily when they weren't being looked at directly. "I think I've seen you somewhere before," he said. Not as a line, just a fact. She was quiet for a moment. "Riverside Terrace, about a week and a half ago." So she'd noticed him too. He didn't know why that surprised him. "I was having a terrible lunch meeting," he said. "You looked it." There was a dryness to her voice that he appreciated. Not unkind, just honest. "The guy across from you kept gesturing with his fork." "That's Derek. He's enthusiastic." "About himself, mostly." Nathan laughed again. He couldn't help it. "Yeah, mostly." He paused. "I'm Nathan." A beat, then, "Claire." They sat for a while without talking, watching their kids. The little girl had abandoned the stroller and was now standing in front of the oak tree, watching Marcus climb with wide, evaluating eyes. "She's going to want to try," Claire said, more to herself than to him. "Marcus will show her. He's annoyingly good at teaching things." Nathan watched his son notice the girl watching him, slow down, and start explaining something with great authority. "And he'll make it sound like it was his idea." "Smart kid." "He's his own person, mostly. I just try not to mess it up too badly." Claire looked at him then, really looked for the first time, and whatever she saw must have passed some kind of test, because the slight tension around her eyes eased a fraction. "How old?" she asked. 7. "You?" "Emma's 5. She looked back at her daughter. 5, going on 45. Marcus is 7, going on either 40 or 4, depending on the day. This time Claire's smile reached her eyes. It changed her whole face, not dramatically, not the way movie smiles did, but genuinely, like something that had been held tightly was allowing itself a moment of looseness. They talked for another 20 minutes. Small things. The park, the oak tree, the way the city's one decent playground was somehow always under construction. Claire was careful about what she shared. Careful in the specific way of someone who had learned that information about yourself could become a liability, but she was not cold. She was just measured. Nathan didn't push. He'd spent enough time in rooms with people who pushed to know what it felt like from the other side. When Emma toddled back over and grabbed Claire's hand to announce that she was hungry, Nathan stood up and said, "It was nice to meet you, Claire," and walked back toward Marcus without asking for her number or suggesting they do this again. He saw her notice that. The absence of the ask. He didn't do it to be strategic. He did it because it was the truth. It had been nice to meet her, and she didn't owe him anything for 20 minutes of park conversation, and he didn't want her to spend the walk home trying to figure out his angle. He didn't have an angle. He just hadn't been able to stop thinking about a menu card placed neatly back in its stand. The second and third times they crossed paths at the park were both on Saturdays, which Nathan eventually realized probably meant she only brought Emma there on weekends. He was there most weekends himself, unless work pulled him away, so the overlap made a kind of quiet logic. The second time, they talked for about 30 minutes. She mentioned she was looking for work. Said it simply, without the apologetic weight that some people attach to it, like they were confessing something shameful. "I'm in between things," was how she put it. "Had a situation at my last place that didn't work out." He didn't ask what situation. She didn't offer. The third time, Marcus and Emma built what Marcus described as a sand fortress in the small playground sandpit, and Nathan and Claire sat on the bench and talked for almost 2 hours. He told her about Diane, something he didn't usually do with people he'd known for less than a month. And she listened the way good listeners did, fully, without filling the silences immediately, without pivoting to her own version of the story the moment he finished. "I'm sorry," she said when he was done, simple and direct. Not, "I can't imagine," or "at least you have Marcus," or any of the other things people said. "Thank you," he said. And then, because she had listened to him without trying to fix anything, he said, "You don't have to tell me what happened at your last job, but if you ever want to, I'll listen the same way." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Emma, who had put a plastic shovel on her head and declared herself the queen of the fortress, while Marcus argued procedural objections. "Maybe," Claire said. "Not today." "Okay," Nathan said. It was not okay to his brain, which kept assembling the pieces of what little he knew, a job that hadn't worked out, financial pressure severe enough that she'd left a restaurant rather than spend money she didn't have, a wariness around men that had the specific texture of learned behavior rather than natural shyness. He'd grown up poor enough to recognize financial stress when he saw it, not the abstract middle-class anxiety about retirement accounts, but the real kind. The kind that lived in your shoulders and made you do math in your head at restaurant menus. His mother had worn that math behind her eyes for most of his childhood, and he'd worked long enough in the professional world to know what it looked like when someone's reputation had been deliberately damaged. He'd seen it done. He'd even, once, had to navigate it himself. A competitor who'd tried to spread rumors about Holloway Consulting's financials early on, hoping to spook investors before a key deal closed. Nathan had handled it, but it had taken months and cost him nights of sleep, and had left him with a permanent, visceral understanding of how much damage could be done by someone willing to lie about you to the right people. He didn't know if that was Claire's story, but the pattern fit well enough that he paid attention, and paying attention was something Nathan Holloway was very, very good at. She told him on a Tuesday, not at the park. He'd run into her at the coffee shop 3 blocks from the park, a smaller place, the kind that had mismatched chairs and charged fair prices. And she'd been sitting alone at a corner table with a notebook, writing something. And when she looked up and saw him, she'd looked startled in a way that told him she hadn't expected their worlds to overlap outside of Saturdays. He bought his coffee. He nodded to her. He was going to keep walking to the other side of the room. Then she said, "You can sit here if you want," in a voice that sounded like she was surprising herself by saying it. He sat. He didn't take out his phone. He didn't open his laptop. He just sat with his coffee and let the silence be comfortable. And after about 10 minutes, she closed her notebook and said, "His name is Richard Calder." Nathan had heard of Richard Calder. Not well. The man ran in investment circles that Nathan's firm occasionally intersected with. And his reputation was the kind that got described in press releases as visionary, while people who actually knew him used other words in private. Mid-50s. New money dressed up as old money, known for acquiring small businesses and restructuring them in ways that were technically legal and practically devastating. "He hired you?" Nathan asked. 18 months ago. Claire looked at her coffee cup. "My last position had ended. Budget cuts, genuine ones, I checked. And I needed work, and Calder Acquisitions was offering a senior coordinator role that paid well. The interview was very professional." A small, humorless sound escaped her. "Very." Nathan waited. "It started about 2 months in," she said. "Little things at first. He'd ask me to stay late for meetings that turned out to be just the 2 of us. He'd find reasons to meet in his private office rather than conference rooms, comments that were just ambiguous enough that I could convince myself I was reading them wrong." She looked up. "I wanted to be reading them wrong. I needed the job." Nathan said nothing. "Then it wasn't ambiguous anymore." Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has told this story to themselves so many times it's been worn down to something she can hold. He was direct. He said he'd been very impressed with my work, and he thought we had a real connection, and he could see me advancing significantly within the company if I was willing to build a stronger personal relationship with him. And when you said no, he said I'd misunderstood him. She almost smiled, and it was a terrible smile. That's what he said first, that I'd misunderstood. Then I got moved off 3 projects I'd been leading. Then my performance reviews started coming back with concerns that had never been raised before. Then I heard, through someone in the office, that he was telling people I had a personal vendetta against him because he'd had to address my poor performance. She shook her head slowly. And then I got laid off. With cause? They called it restructuring, but I'd seen the org chart. My position was filled within 6 weeks. She looked out the window. And then the calls I made to other companies started coming back wrong. Good interviews that suddenly went cold. A recruiter I'd worked with before who told me, off the record, that she'd heard things. Nathan's jaw was tight. He was working to keep his voice level. What things? That I was difficult. That I had escalated a personal conflict with my supervisor into a HR situation. That I wasn't a team player. She said it with the flatness of someone repeating words they've heard enough times to stop feeling their full weight. All backwards. All from him. She picked up her coffee. Her hand was steady, but he noticed the faint tension in the way she held the cup. Not trembling, just held too carefully. I couldn't prove any of it, she said. He was careful. And I had Emma, and I was burning through my savings trying to keep us in our apartment, and every lead I followed somehow got back to him or to someone who knew him, and eventually I had to... She stopped. Had to what? Had to start accepting that I might have to start over completely, somewhere he didn't have reach. She looked back at Nathan, which is harder than it sounds when you have a 5-year-old and no family in the city. The cafe was quiet around them. Someone at the counter was ordering something with oat milk. The espresso machine hissed. Nathan said, "Can I ask you something directly?" She looked at him. "Have you talked to anyone about the legal angle? What he did to your employment, the retaliation?" "I talked to a lawyer." A pause. "Briefly. She said I had a possible case, but it would take time and money I didn't have, and without documentation of the specific conversations, it was my word against a man with a very good legal team." She set her cup down. "And before you offer to help with the legal fees, I wasn't going to." She blinked. "I was going to ask," Nathan said carefully, "if you'd be willing to sit down with my HR director. Not to litigate anything, just to talk. She's dealt with situations like this before, and she knows what documentation actually matters versus what people think matters." He paused. "But that's only if you want to. I'm not running a rescue operation." The last line made her breath catch slightly. He saw it. "Why?" she asked. "Not why are you offering, because that was clear enough." She meant, why me? Why now? Why any of this? Nathan took a moment before answering because he wanted to give her the real answer and not a polished one. "Because I grew up watching my mother do math in her head every time we went anywhere," he said. "And I knew what it meant when she did it. And I recognized it when I saw you at Riverside Terrace." He paused. "And I don't think what happened to you should get to be the end of your story." Claire looked at him for a long time. The wariness in her face didn't disappear. He wasn't sure it would, fully, for a long time. But something in it shifted. "I'm not good at accepting help," she said. "I know. I'm going to be very difficult about it." I assumed. Something that was almost a real smile. "Okay," she said. "Tell me about this HR director." Her name was Sylvia Okafor, and she had been Nathan's HR director for 6 years, and she had the specific combination of warmth and precision that Nathan had learned to seek in people who dealt with complicated human situations. The meeting happened the following Thursday, in a small conference room at Holloway Consulting, not Nathan's office, because that felt too much like being summoned, and not a coffee shop because this was a serious conversation and deserved a serious space. Nathan was not in the room. He'd offered to be if it would make Claire more comfortable. She'd looked at him like that was the wrong instinct, but appreciated the wrong instinct being offered, and said she'd rather do it without him. He sat in his office for 2 hours and tried to concentrate on 3 different reports, and did not concentrate on any of them. Sylvia found him at his desk afterward. "She's impressive," was the first thing she said. "Tell me what I can do." Sylvia sat down in the chair across from his desk, She was one of the few people on his staff who sat without being invited to, which he'd always respected. The situation she described is consistent and detailed, the kind of detail you don't invent, and she has more documentation than she thinks, emails, a timeline she's kept, some messages from colleagues that corroborate parts of the timeline. She folded her hands on the desk. There's not enough for an airtight legal case without significant effort, but there's enough to protect her professionally if we bring her on board. I was thinking about the coordinator role that opened up on Grayson's team. I was thinking the same thing. Sylvia paused. Nathan, she's going to resist this. I know. She's going to assume there are strings. I know. So when you talk to her, be very specific about what this is and what it isn't. Don't be vague and warm, because vague and warm is what got her into the last situation. Nathan nodded. Direct terms, real contract, no ambiguity. And keep your distance while she settles in. Sylvia gave him a look that was not unkind. You're the CEO. If you check in on her too often, it sends a message whether you mean it to or not. He held Sylvia's gaze. That won't be a problem. Sylvia held his gaze back for a long moment. Okay, she said, like she believed him, but was filing the conversation away. Yeah, Claire pushed back on the job offer for almost a week. She came to Nathan at the coffee shop. She chose the meeting place, which he thought was smart of her, and said, I need to understand the terms. Of course, Nathan said. I want a real contract, not a contractor arrangement, not a trial period. A formal employment contract with standard protections. Already written up. Sylvia drafted it. You can have your own lawyer review it. She looked at him. I don't currently have a lawyer. I know, I can give you the name of 3 employment attorneys who are not connected to my firm in any way. You choose, I'll pay the review fee. Why? Because you need someone in your corner who answers to you. Claire looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the look of someone recalibrating, updating their map of a situation. The role, she said. What is it exactly? He told her. Project coordinator on Grayson's team, shit. Thomas Grayson, who Nathan described accurately as difficult in the good way, has high standards, gives credit where it's due, and does not tolerate anyone on his team being treated poorly. Have you told him about my situation? I told him you're an experienced coordinator who'd been in a difficult professional situation that was not your fault, and that I thought he should meet you. Nathan paused. The rest of your story is yours. You share as much or as little as you want to. And if Calder tries to bring his version of events into your professional relationship with us, Nathan said, he'll be talking to our legal team, who know what he did and have been advised accordingly. Claire stared at him. You looked into him, she said. I have a very good research director. Nathan kept his voice even. What he did to you is not a secret to everyone who worked with him. It's a secret that he's been very active in maintaining. There's a difference. Claire was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the street at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon passing outside. I'm going to be very professional, she said finally, looking back at him. I'm not going to let you down. Claire. He waited until she was looking directly at him. You don't owe me anything. You're going to do good work because that's who you are, not as a favor to me. She looked like she wanted to argue with that. Then she let out a slow breath. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. I'll take the job. She started on a Monday, 3 weeks later. Nathan did not go down to greet her. He heard from Sylvia at noon that she'd arrived early, set up her workstation efficiently, introduced herself to Grayson's team without drama, and been asked by Marcus, who had a half day from school and was sitting in Nathan's office doing homework while waiting to be picked up, whether her name was Claire because that was his dad's friend from the park. Sylvia told him this with a carefully neutral expression. Nathan put his head in his hands. What did she say? He asked. She said yes, and asked him what his name was, and he told her and said he was working on a division problem that was very unfair, and she helped him with it. Nathan looked up. She helped him with his math homework. Apparently she's good at division, Sylvia paused. He told her she was very smart. Of course he did. Nathan rubbed his face. Okay, that's okay. She seemed fine with it, Sylvia said. More than fine, actually. She was smiling when I walked past. Nathan nodded at his desk and said nothing. Nathan, Sylvia said. I know, he said. Good, she said, and left. What? He kept his distance, the way Sylvia had told him to. He passed her in the hallway twice in the first week and said the same easy nothing he'd say to any employee. How's it going? How's the team treating you? Good to see you settling in. He did not ask about Emma. He did not suggest coffee. She'd find her footing or she wouldn't, and hovering over her wouldn't change which one happened. What he hadn't counted on was Thomas Grayson coming into his office 3 weeks later, sitting down without being invited, the second person on his staff who did this, and saying, "Where did you find this woman?" Nathan looked up from his screen. Claire? She caught an error in the Meridian proposal that would have cost us about $40,000 in contract penalties. She caught it at 10 p.m. the night before the submission deadline, emailed me, and had a corrected version ready by 6 a.m. Grayson leaned back in the chair with the expression of a man who had just found $20 in an old jacket. I've been in this industry for 20 years. You don't find people who catch errors at 10 p.m. and have solutions by 6 a.m. You find people who send you an email at 10 p.m. about the error and then wait for someone else to solve it. Nathan carefully kept his expression neutral. She's good at her job. She's exceptional at her job, Grayson pointed at him. I'm telling you now so that when Ellison or Priya tries to poach her for their teams, you back me up. I'm sure she'd appreciate being consulted about that. Grayson blinked, then he nodded slowly. Right. Yes. Obviously. He stood up. She's exceptional. I'll tell her you said so. I told her myself 3 times. Grayson was already heading for the door. Don't let Ellison talk to her. Nathan waited until Grayson left, then let himself sit quietly for a moment. He thought about a woman placing a menu card carefully back in its stand. He thought, there she is. Bite. At the park on Saturday, Marcus ran to Emma immediately, and Emma dropped whatever she'd been doing with the focused decisiveness of a 5-year-old who has already decided exactly who her friends are, and the two of them disappeared toward the oak tree, and Nathan and Claire sat on their bench. They didn't talk about work. There was an unspoken agreement about that, he thought, that the park was a different thing from the office, and that keeping those two things separate was important for reasons neither of them had articulated. Emma had her first nightmare that she could describe, Claire said. Last week. She woke me up at 3 a.m., fully convinced there was a spider in her room. Was there? Absolutely not, but I checked every corner of that room in the dark at 3 in the morning, because you can't tell a 5-year-old that you didn't check and expect her to go back to sleep. Did it help? She was asleep again in 4 minutes. I was awake until 6. Claire shook her head. The physics of parenting are completely unfair. Marcus was afraid of the drain in the bathtub for about 6 months when he was 4, Nathan said. Fully convinced something lived in it. What did you do? I sat on the bathroom floor next to the tub while he had his bath for 6 months. He paused. And I sang. Claire looked at him. You sang. It turned out the singing was the point, not the drain. He just needed something louder than the drain noise. Nathan shrugged slightly. I figured that out around month 4. What did you sing? Old Motown mostly, a little Johnny Cash when I was too tired to get the notes right on the Motown. He looked at the oak tree, where Marcus was demonstrating something structural about the lower branches to Emma, who was paying very close attention. He still asks for Motown sometimes when he can't sleep. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's a good story, in a voice that meant something more than the words. Yeah, Nathan said. It is. They sat in the afternoon light, watching their kids, and the October air was cool and clean, and a leaf fell from the oak tree, and Emma caught it and held it up like she'd won something, and Marcus shouted nice catch with the authority of a 7-year-old sports commentator, and Claire laughed. A real one, unguarded, gone before she remembered to be careful about it. Nathan looked at the tree. He did not look at her, but he was aware, in the way that you become aware of the precise weight of something you're trying not to hold too tightly, that something was changing. He didn't know what to do with that yet. So he watched the kids and drank his cold coffee and said nothing. 3 months after Claire Bennett walked through the front door of Holloway Consulting, Nathan found himself doing something he hadn't done since the early days of building the company. He started arriving at the office later than everyone else. Not dramatically later. 20, 30 minutes. But for a man who had spent 12 years being the first person in the building, who had a standing joke with the overnight security guard, a retired cop named Benny, about whether Nathan counted as part of the cleaning crew, it was noticed. Priya noticed first. His assistant noticed everything first. It was what made her indispensable and occasionally exhausting. She didn't say anything directly. She simply began scheduling his first morning meetings for 9:15 instead of 8:45 without explanation, and when he asked her about it, she said, "You seemed like you needed the time," and moved on before he could argue. What she didn't know, what he hadn't told anyone, was that the reason he was leaving the house later was Marcus. Specifically, Marcus had started having trouble sleeping. It had begun quietly, the way most things with children began. A night here, a night there, nothing alarming. Marcus would appear in the doorway of Nathan's bedroom at 11 or midnight, not crying, just standing there with his pillow under his arm and his hair sideways from tossing around. And Nathan would lift the blanket without making a thing of it, and Marcus would climb in and be asleep in 6 minutes, and Nathan would lie awake for 2 more hours trying to identify what was wrong, because something was wrong. He knew his son well enough to know that much. He brought it up carefully one Saturday morning over the pancakes that Marcus was increasingly capable of making himself, though Nathan still handled the stove because Marcus's relationship with heat regulation was ambitious rather than precise. "You sleeping okay?" Nathan asked, in the voice he used when he was trying not to make the question feel like a question. Marcus flipped a pancake with slightly too much force. It landed correctly anyway. "Fine," he said. "You've been coming in at night." "My room gets cold." Nathan looked at the thermostat on the kitchen wall, which was set to the same temperature it had been set to for 3 years. "Does it?" "Kind of." "Marcus." His son looked at the pancakes. Then he looked up with the expression he'd been making since he was about 3. The one that meant he was trying to decide whether honesty was worth the vulnerability of it. "Is Emma's mom going to keep working at your company?" he asked. Nathan kept his voice neutral. "As far as I know. Why?" "Owen at school said his mom said that lady friends at work are complicated." Marcus poked at the edge of a pancake. "He said it doesn't usually last." Nathan set down his coffee cup. Owen's mom, whoever she was, could keep her observations to herself. But that wasn't the conversation they were actually having, and he knew it. "Emma's mom works at the company because she's very good at her job," Nathan said. "That's the beginning and end of it." He waited a beat. "What are you actually worried about?" Marcus was quiet for long enough that the pancakes needed turning, and Nathan turned them. "I don't want things to get weird," Marcus said finally. "Like, things are okay how they are. I don't want it to get weird, and then we can't go to the park anymore." Nathan looked at his son, 7 years old, missing one front tooth, fluent in anxiety he couldn't name yet, and felt the particular kind of love that comes with knowing you are responsible for a person's sense of the world being safe. "The park isn't going anywhere," he said. "How do you know?" "Because I'm very responsible about parks." Nathan picked up the plate. "Eat your pancakes. The ones you made are actually better than mine this time. Don't tell anyone." Marcus looked suspicious, then pleased. "Really?" "The edges are better. I always get the edges wrong." This satisfied Marcus in the way that a real observation always satisfied him. He wasn't a kid who responded to empty praise. He knew the difference. Nathan had always tried to give him the real kind, even when the real kind was harder to find. They ate. Marcus talked about a project at school involving a model of the solar system and the ongoing controversy about whether Pluto deserved representation. Nathan listened and occasionally had opinions. The morning settled back into its ordinary texture. But later, washing the dishes, Nathan thought about what Marcus had said. "I don't want things to get weird." The problem, he was starting to understand, was that things were already a little weird. Not in any way he could point to. Not in any way that had crossed a line or created a situation that needed managing. It was just that Claire Bennett existed in his life now in a way that she hadn't 6 months ago, and that existence had weight to it that he hadn't calculated for. He thought about the park bench. He thought about cold coffee and Motown and the way she'd said, "That's a good story," like it had landed somewhere in her she hadn't expected it to reach. He washed the last pan and told himself to focus on things he could control. It didn't entirely work. Richard Calder resurfaced on a Wednesday in November, which was, as far as Nathan was concerned, the worst possible timing because he was already having a difficult week. The difficulty had nothing to do with Claire. It had to do with a contract dispute with a firm in Seattle that was threatening to go to arbitration over a timeline clause that Nathan's team believed was clear and the Seattle firm's lawyers believed was ambiguous. And it had to do with Marcus getting a mild ear infection that had disrupted everyone's sleep for 4 days. And it had to do with a piece in a business publication that described Holloway Consulting as a firm whose best years may be behind it, which was wrong, but wrong in print was still wrong. So when his research director, a methodical and perpetually underreacted man named James Chen, appeared in Nathan's doorway on a Wednesday afternoon and said, "You should see something," Nathan knew before James finished the sentence that it wasn't going to be good. James set a folder on his desk. Inside was a printout of an email chain, sourced, James explained, from a contact at a recruitment firm, in which Richard Calder had apparently been asking questions about Holloway Consulting's current staff, specifically about a senior coordinator on Thomas Grayson's team. "He's asking if she's reachable," James said, pointing to a line in the email. "The phrasing is careful. It doesn't say her name directly in most of it, but the context makes it clear." Nathan read the email chain twice. His expression didn't change. It was a skill he'd developed over years of negotiations, the ability to keep his face still while the rest of him responded to information. "What's his angle?" Nathan asked. "Unknown. Could be he wants to reopen contact with her. Could be he's gathering information to use against her professionally. Could be both." James paused. "The recruiter who forwarded this to my contact knows Calder's reputation. She wasn't comfortable with the inquiry." "Who is she?" "Her name's Donna Park. She's been in this city's recruitment market for 15 years. James hesitated. "She's also the same recruiter Claire mentioned when she talked to Sylvia, the one who told her off the record that she'd heard things, the one Calder got to first." Nathan set the email printout down. "So Donna Park is trying to give us a heads up," he said. "That's my reading. Does Claire know?" "Not yet. You're the first person I've told." Nathan was quiet for a moment, turning over the pieces. There were 2 immediate questions: what Calder was actually planning, and how to tell Claire. The second one was harder. He'd thought about this in the abstract, the possibility that Calder would eventually become aware that Claire had landed somewhere stable, somewhere with resources behind her. Men like Calder didn't like loose ends. They liked control, and Claire had slipped out of his control, and the fact that she'd found footing somewhere else would read to him not as a resolution, but as an ongoing threat to the version of events he'd established. "Get me everything you can find on Calder's current professional situation," Nathan said, quietly. "Nothing that looks like we're investigating him." "Already started," James said, which was why Nathan valued him. "And set up a time for me to talk to our legal team this week." "Done." James picked up his folder, then at the door, "Do you want me to be there when you tell her?" Nathan shook his head. "That's not a group conversation." James nodded and left. Nathan sat for a long time at his desk. He was aware, somewhere uncomfortable and honest, that the anger he was feeling was not purely professional. It wasn't just the principle of the thing, the offense of a man who'd abused his position, now circling back to extend that damage. It was that the damage had been done to Claire specifically, and he knew Claire now, knew how carefully she'd rebuilt her professional confidence, knew the specific effort it had cost her to walk through his company's door without looking like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The thought of Calder reaching into that, reaching into the thing she'd rebuilt, made Nathan's jaw tight in a way that had nothing to do with business strategy. He let himself feel that for about 45 seconds. Then he picked up the phone and called the legal team. He told Claire on Thursday. He chose the small conference room again. Not his office, because his office had a power dynamic to it that this conversation didn't need. And he asked Sylvia to be there, not as a witness, but because Claire deserved to have a woman in the room when she heard this. Claire arrived precisely on time, which she always did, She was carrying a project file because she'd thought this was a work meeting, and when she saw Nathan's expression, she set the file on the table and sat down without speaking. He told her plainly, no softening, no build-up. Just the information, clean and direct, the way Sylvia had told him Claire needed it. When he finished, she was very still. He's looking for me, she said. It wasn't a question. He's asking questions. We don't know yet what he intends to do with the answers. I know what he intends. Her voice was flat. He does this. When someone gets away from him, when someone doesn't just disappear quietly, he comes back. He likes to make sure the story stays his story. Sylvia said quietly, our legal team is already aware of the situation. If he makes any contact with your professional network or attempts to share information about you with clients or partners, we have grounds to act on that. Claire looked at her, then at Nathan. Why? She said, and it was the same word she'd used in the coffee shop, the same question under it. Why are you doing this for me? Because he already did it once, and it almost worked, Nathan said. I'm not interested in watching him try again. There was something happening in Claire's face that she was working to control. Not tears, but the specific tension of a person who is trying very hard not to fall apart in a room where they've decided they will not fall apart. I want to talk to your legal team myself, she said. I want to understand exactly what they know and what the options are. Of course, Nathan said. I'll set it up for whenever works for you. Tomorrow morning, I'll have Priya arrange it. She nodded. She picked up her project file from the table, a reflex, a way of giving her hand something to do. She stood up, then she stopped at the door. Nathan. She didn't turn around immediately. The first time I walked into this building, I spent the whole morning waiting for the part where I'd figure out what was actually being asked of me. She paused. I'm still waiting. He looked at her. I know. She turned then, just enough to see his face. I'm not sure what to do with someone who doesn't want anything, she said. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. It's not a problem that needs solving. She held his gaze for a moment, then she left. Sylvia waited approximately 4 seconds before saying, You're in trouble. I'm aware, Nathan said. Good, she said for the second time, in the same tone as the first. The meeting with the legal team happened Friday morning. Nathan was not there. Claire went alone, which he'd expected. She did her best work without an audience, without someone in the room she might feel watched by. What his lead attorney, Margaret Ewan, told him afterward was this. Claire had walked in with a notebook. In the notebook was a timeline she had kept, meticulously, dating back 18 months. Every incident, every shifted performance review, every cold call from a recruiter. She had dates, she had email subjects, she had the name of the colleague who'd passed her Calder's comments secondhand. Margaret had been doing employment law for 22 years. She told Nathan that it was, quote, the most organized documentation of workplace retaliation she had seen from a non-attorney. She kept records the whole time, Nathan said. 18 months. She didn't know if they'd ever be useful. She just kept them. Margaret paused. She told me she wasn't sure why. I told her it was because part of her knew she'd need them eventually. Nathan thought about Claire setting a menu card neatly back in its stand. He thought, of course she did. The preparation. The quiet, stubborn insistence on being ready even when readiness felt pointless. That wasn't a legal strategy. That was a person who had decided, somewhere in the middle of being systematically dismantled, that they were not going to let it happen without a record. Margaret said they could build a strong harassment and professional defamation case if Calder made any further moves. The documentation Claire had provided, combined with what James's research had already assembled about Calder's broader pattern of behavior, 2 other women had had similar situations, settled quietly, under NDA, was significant. If he comes at her again, Margaret said, we will be ready for him in a way he will not expect. Make sure she knows that, Nathan said, not as a favor from me, as her legal reality. Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who had learned to distinguish between men who said things like that because they meant it and men who said it to sound like they meant it. She seemed to conclude he meant it. I'll call her directly, she said. Nathan nodded. The weeks that followed had a particular kind of tension to them. Not the explosive kind, but the low-grade background kind, like a frequency you could feel in your teeth. Calder was quiet. No new inquiries surfaced. James kept monitoring and reporting nothing to report, which was its own form of information. Calder had become aware, somehow, that the ground had shifted. Claire threw herself into work with the ferocity of a person who processes difficult things by being very productive. Thomas Grayson was delighted. His team was delighted. She led the restructuring of the Meridian project timeline with a precision that made the Seattle contract dispute, which had been resolved by then, in Holloway Consulting's favor, look simple by comparison. Nathan watched from a professional distance, which was the correct thing to do, and it cost him something. He saw her at the park on 3 more Saturdays in November. The conversations were good. They were always good, in the specific way of 2 people who found each other genuinely interesting and were both trying very hard not to think too hard about why. They talked about Marcus's solar system project, which had been declared by his teacher to be among the most passionately argued in the class, specifically the section on Pluto. They talked about Emma's growing conviction that dogs were secretly able to understand full sentences and were simply choosing not to respond. They talked about Nathan's mother, who lived in Phoenix and called every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. without fail, and about Claire's sister in Portland, who was the only family she was close to. "Does your sister know?" Nathan asked once. "About Calder, what happened?" "She knows the outline," Claire said. "She wanted to come here. I told her not to." She pulled her jacket tighter against the November cold. I didn't want to need rescuing. I know that sounds stupid." "It doesn't sound stupid. It sounds proud." "There's nothing wrong with pride," Nathan said. "Pride is how you knew to write everything down." She looked at him. "Margaret told you about the notebook?" "She told me you were prepared. She didn't tell me the details." He paused. "I filled in the rest." Claire was quiet for a moment. Emma was running in circles around the oak tree for reasons known only to Emma. Marcus had given up trying to understand the logic and was running in circles too. "After David left," Claire said, "Emma was 14 months old. It wasn't dramatic. He just decided he wasn't built for it." She watched her daughter. "And I thought for a long time that I should have seen it coming, that I should have been smarter, that I should have—" She stopped. "You can't predict who people are going to decide not to be," Nathan said. "No." She exhaled. "No, you can't." A pause. "I think I picked Calder's job because part of me was trying to prove I could handle things alone, that I was capable, that I didn't need whatever." She made a small, frustrated gesture with her hand, and then I walked into exactly the kind of situation where being capable didn't protect me at all. "It's why he picked people like you," Nathan said carefully. "Capable, independent, not connected to the kind of networks that make noise. He knew what he was doing." Claire's jaw tightened. "I know. Margaret explained that." She turned to look at Nathan directly. "Does it ever stop? That feeling of, I should have known?" Nathan thought about Diane, about the morning the hospital had called, about the conversation he'd had afterward with a grief counselor who had said exactly the wrong thing and a friend who had said exactly the right thing without meaning to, and about the months he'd spent asking himself what he'd missed, what he should have seen coming, what he should have done differently. "Eventually, it gets quieter," he said. "It doesn't go away, but it gets quieter." Claire studied his face. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. "Okay," she said. They watched the kids run. The cold settled around them. At some point, Marcus yelled, "Emma, you're it," and Emma yelled, "I'm always it." "That's not fair," and Marcus yelled, "That's the rules." And Claire muttered, "There are no rules. Marcus is making that up." And Nathan said, "Absolutely he is." And they looked at each other and both started laughing at the same moment. It was the first time they'd laughed at the same exact thing at the same exact moment, and it lasted maybe 4 seconds, and then they both looked away. But it had happened. The thing about Calder broke open on a Tuesday in December, 2 weeks before Christmas. Nathan was in a client presentation when his phone buzzed with a message from James. "Need you when you're done. Priority." He wrapped the presentation in 20 minutes instead of 45, which his team noticed and adjusted to without comment. because they'd worked with him long enough to read his gear shifts. James was waiting in Nathan's office. Beside him was someone Nathan didn't recognize. A woman in her late 40s, conservatively dressed, with the careful posture of someone who had spent a long time learning how to sit in rooms where they didn't have power and had eventually stopped needing to. "This is Donna Park," James said. The recruiter. The one who had warned them about Calder's inquiry. Nathan shook her hand and sat down and listened. What Donna Park had come to say was this: Richard Calder had approached her directly 2 weeks ago. Not through email this time, but in person, at an industry networking event. He had been charming, which she said he always was in person, and he had said that he was concerned about a former employee who he believed was being exploited by her current employer, that he had information about this individual's conduct that he felt responsible parties should be aware of. He framed it as concern, Donna said. Her voice was dry and precise. He's very good at that. What information? Nathan asked. He said Claire had fabricated elements of a HR complaint against him in order to avoid consequences for her own poor performance, and that she was currently in a personal relationship with her employer, you, which he suggested was the reason she'd been hired. Donna looked at Nathan steadily. He said he had documentation. Nathan kept his face still. He was very good at this. What documentation? He said. He didn't specify. He implied. He's good at implying. Donna folded her hands. He asked me whether I'd be willing to share his perspective with my professional contacts, given my reach in the recruitment network. He made it sound like a courtesy to the industry. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. She met Nathan's eyes. I'm not going to. But I wanted you to know what he's doing, and I wanted to say this directly. She paused. 3 years ago, I passed along things I'd heard about Claire to a company that was considering hiring her. I didn't verify them. I should have. I've thought about that a lot. The room was quiet. You came here to say that, Nathan said. I came here because it's the right thing to do, and because I've watched Calder do this to 3 other women that I know of, and because if he tries it this time, I want to be on the right side of it. She looked at her hands, and yes, because I should have done better 3 years ago. Nathan nodded. I appreciate you coming. Is she going to be okay? Donna asked, direct, like she'd been building to it. Yes, Nathan said. He meant it as a legal and professional statement, but as he said it, he understood it was also something else. James walked Donna out. Nathan sat at his desk and thought about the shape of what Calder was doing. He was building a preemptive narrative, getting his version into circulation before anything official happened, so that if and when Claire or Nathan's firm moved against him, there'd already be a counterstory seeded in the professional community. She fabricated things. She's sleeping with her boss to stay employed. The complaints against me are revenge. It was calculated and it was ugly and it was almost clever. Almost. Because the thing Calder hadn't accounted for was the notebook. Nathan called Margaret, then he called Sylvia. Then he sat for 10 minutes and did something he rarely did during work hours. He thought not about strategy, but about Claire's face when she'd said, I don't want to need rescuing. He picked up the phone and called Claire directly. She answered on the second ring. Nathan, are you somewhere you can talk for a few minutes? A brief pause. Conference room B. I was about to head back to my desk. What's wrong? He told her. All of it. Donna's visit, Calder's approach, the narrative he was attempting to plant. When he finished, she was quiet for long enough that he said, Claire, I'm here. Her voice was very controlled. He's saying we're in a relationship. Yes. To discredit both of us. That's the goal. And he has no evidence because there is no evidence because... She stopped herself. Because there's nothing to document, Nathan thought but didn't say. Because we sit on a park bench on Saturdays and we talk about our kids, and the thing that is happening between us exists only in the things we haven't said yet, and it has no shape that Calder can point to. What do we do? She asked. Margaret wants to move. Not defensively. Proactively. She wants to file a formal complaint with the Industry Ethics Board using the documentation you provided. She believes the 2 other women from Calder's past can be identified and may be willing to speak now that there's a formal process. Another pause. That's a big move. Yes. If that goes forward, it becomes public. My name becomes associated with a formal complaint against a known figure in this industry. Her voice was steady, but he could hear what was underneath it. I spent 18 months trying to get my reputation back, and now your reputation is strong enough to survive being attached to the truth, Nathan said. You have documentation. You have a legal team. You have a firm standing behind your account of events. He paused. 3 years ago, you had none of that. This is not the same situation. Silence. I know, she said finally. I know it's not the same. A breath. I am very tired of having to fight this person. I know. I am tired of him taking up space in my life. I know. Nathan looked at the city through his window. That's exactly why this has to end now. Not managed, not monitored. Ended. He heard her breathe. Once. Twice. Okay, she said. Set up the meeting with Margaret. I'll be there. I'll have Priya call you. Nathan. She said his name the way she sometimes did at the park, without any professional distance in it. Thank you for calling me directly, for not just handling it and telling me afterward. He could have said something polished. He didn't. It's your life, he said. You should be in the room where it's being decided. She said nothing for a moment. Then, yeah, quietly, almost to herself. Yeah. She hung up. Nathan sat at his desk until Benny the security guard appeared in the hall doing his 4 o'clock round, and Nathan raised a hand and Benny raised one back, and the ordinary machinery of the day continued. Thomas Grayson appeared in Nathan's doorway at 4:30. Claire's leaving early, he said, not as a complaint. She said she had something personal. She does. Grayson looked at him. Is she okay? She's going to be. Grayson stood there for a moment with the expression of a man who wanted to ask more and had decided not to. She reworked the Callaway client deck this morning, he said instead. It's better than what I had. I'll tell her you said so. I told her myself. Grayson shifted in the doorway. You know, when you brought her in, I thought you were doing someone a favor. The kind of favor you do when you want someone to feel good about themselves. He said it with the directness Nathan had always valued in him, the willingness to say the uncomfortable thing plainly. I was wrong about that. Yes, Nathan said. You were. Grayson nodded and left. Nathan turned back to the window. Outside, the December light was falling fast and cold, and somewhere in the parking structure below his building, Claire Bennett was getting into her car, and she was going home to an apartment she'd secured herself to a daughter who believed dogs understood everything. And she was tired and angry and still, underneath it, standing. He thought of something his mother had told him once, years ago, when he was about 22 and furious about something he couldn't even remember now. She'd said, "The people who keep standing when everything's pushing them down, they're not stronger than everyone else. They're just more stubborn about deciding what they owe themselves." He hadn't fully understood it then. He thought he understood it now. The meeting with Margaret Ewan happened on a Thursday morning, 9 days before Christmas, in a conference room that smelled like dry erase markers and recycled air. Claire arrived 7 minutes early. Nathan knew this because Priya mentioned it in passing, not as information she thought he needed, but in the way she sometimes released small facts into conversations to see what he did with them. He did nothing with it. He was not in the meeting. He had made a deliberate choice to be in Portland for 2 days for a client review, partly because the timing had worked out that way, and partly because he understood, with the clarity that came from knowing himself reasonably well, that if he was in the building, he would find reasons to walk past that conference room, and that was not useful for anyone. Margaret called him at noon. He was in a rental car outside a coffee shop in Portland, and the rain was doing what Portland rain did in December, which was commit fully to the premise. She was excellent, Margaret said, composed, precise, knew exactly which documents were where in that notebook. We went through everything for 2 hours, and she didn't lose the thread once. A pause. She asked good questions, the kind that tell you someone is listening to understand the process, not just waiting for reassurance. What's the path forward? We're filing with the ethics board the week after New Year's. In the meantime, I've made quiet contact with the attorneys who handled the 2 prior cases involving Calder. One of the women has already indicated she may be willing to provide a supporting statement. The other is still considering. Margaret's voice was careful. This is going to take time, Nathan. Ethics board processes are not fast. I know, and it will get public before it's resolved. His name, her name, your firm's name, at least peripherally. I know that too. I want to make sure your communications team is prepared. Already in conversation with them. He watched the rain streak down the windshield. How did she seem when she left? A brief pause, the kind Margaret used when she was deciding how much to say. Like someone who's been carrying something for a long time and just put it down long enough to see how heavy it was. She paused again. She said something as she was leaving that I thought you should know. What? She said, I want this to be about the right thing, not about me being angry. I told her it could be both. Another pause. She seemed to need permission for that. Nathan sat in the rain in Portland and said nothing for a moment. Thank you, Margaret, he said. Go do your client review, she said, and hung up. He sat in the car for another 10 minutes before going inside for coffee. He was back in the city by Friday evening, in time to pick up Marcus from the sitter and make dinner, which was pasta because it was Friday, and pasta was the Friday rule, established by Marcus at age 5 and never successfully renegotiated. How was Portland? Marcus asked with his fork. Wet? Did you see the bridge? Which one? Marcus considered this. Any of them. I saw 2 from the highway. That counts, Marcus decided, and returned to his pasta. After dinner, after the dishes, after Marcus had been read to and had fallen asleep with the trustworthy speed of a child who had exhausted himself thoroughly at school, Nathan stood in the kitchen with a glass of water and looked at the dark backyard and thought about what Margaret had said. She needed permission to be angry. He understood that more than he'd expected to. There was a particular kind of person, he had been one in the years after Diane, who spent so much energy managing other people's comfort around their pain that they forgot they were allowed to just have it. Who dressed up anger as something more acceptable, more rational, more professional. Who said I want this to be about the right thing because saying I am so angry I can barely speak felt like losing. He hadn't known Claire 2 Christmases ago. He'd known no one like her. Now he did, and he understood that what she needed, underneath all the practicalities, the legal strategy, the documentation, the professional protections, was for someone to say, you are allowed to be furious. Being furious doesn't make you less credible. It makes you human. He would tell her that. When the time was right, when it wouldn't feel like he was inserting himself into something she was still working out. He was getting better, he thought, at knowing the difference between the right thing and the right time. The office Christmas party was the following Wednesday, which Nathan attended for exactly 90 minutes, long enough to be present, not long enough to make it feel mandatory. Holloway Consulting's parties were modest by industry standards, which was intentional. Open bar for 2 hours, decent catering, a playlist that someone on the events team curated with genuine care. No speeches, no award ceremonies that made people who hadn't won feel like they'd lost something. He circulated, talked to people, was genuinely interested in what they said because he was, genuinely interested in people. He talked to the new analyst on the finance team who was clearly terrified of him and needed about 6 minutes of ordinary conversation to understand that he wasn't. He talked to Grayson about the Callaway deck and to Priya about nothing in particular, which they both needed sometimes. He talked to 2 members of the Portland team who'd flown in for the occasion. He did not make a point of talking to Claire. He saw her across the room twice. The first time she was talking to 2 women from the research team, laughing at something one of them had said, her posture open in the way it got when she was comfortable, when she'd stopped monitoring herself. The second time she was at the food table, examining the cheese selection with the same focused assessment she'd applied to the Riverside Terrace menu 6 months ago, except now there was no math behind her eyes, just consideration. She chose the aged Gouda. He almost smiled. She looked up once and found him looking, and he nodded, and she nodded, and they both looked away. And that was the entire interaction, and it was enough for the evening and also not enough. And he knew that she knew that too. This was the thing that had been building since October, since the moment they'd laughed at the same second about Marcus and Emma and the question of rules that Marcus was making up. It had a weight and a texture, and neither of them was doing anything about it, and the reasons for that were real and valid and also increasingly difficult to sustain. He left the party at 8:15, picked up Marcus from the sitter, and spent the drive home listening to his son provide a comprehensive critique of the school's holiday concert, in which Marcus had played a triangle with, in his own assessment, unnecessary skill for an instrument that did not deserve it. "Then why did you do it?" Nathan asked. "Because Luke wanted the drum, and I could see how much he wanted it, and I didn't care that much," Marcus said. "And also because Miss Dietrich said the triangle was very important, and I think she needed someone to believe her." Nathan looked at his son in the rearview mirror, 7 years old, missing one front tooth, the most quietly decent person he knew. "That was generous," Nathan said. "It was practical," Marcus said, in the tone of someone who had not yet been told he was allowed to call things generous. Christmas came and went the way it did when you were a parent doing it mostly alone. Full and slightly exhausting, enormous in the ways that mattered to Marcus, and manageable in the ways that didn't. Nathan's mother flew in from Phoenix for 4 days and spent most of it in the kitchen and the rest of it asking questions about Nathan's personal life that he fielded with the practiced evasion of 12 years of practice. Marcus, who could read his grandmother like a book he'd been given several times, told her at breakfast on Christmas morning that his dad had a friend named Claire, and she had a daughter named Emma, and Emma thought dogs understood everything. Nathan's mother looked at her son over her coffee cup with the expression of a woman updating a significant file. "Is she nice?" his mother asked. "She's good at math," Marcus said. "That's not the same thing." "No, but they're related," Marcus said, with the confidence of a boy who had decided this was true and had not been challenged on it. Nathan said, "Mom," in the tone that meant please, and his mother said, "I'm just asking," in the tone that meant I am not just asking, and the Christmas morning continued. After his mother left, after the house went quiet again, Nathan found himself in the strange flat week between Christmas and New Year's that felt like a gap in time. The year not quite done, the new one not quite started. He worked less than usual, which Marcus approved of. He took Marcus to a movie, to the Science Museum, to a basketball game that Marcus spent mostly explaining to Nathan, despite having learned the rules approximately 14 months ago. He cooked things that took longer than necessary, because cooking was one of the few activities that still managed to fully occupy his mind. He thought about Claire less than he'd expected to during this week, not because she wasn't there, in the background, but because he'd gotten better at letting the thinking happen at a low volume rather than a high one. It was something Diane's therapist, who had technically been Nathan's therapist in the grief months but always felt like he'd borrowed her from Diane, had called making space for things without demanding they resolve. He was not naturally good at that. He was naturally good at identifying a problem and moving toward a solution. The fact that this wasn't a problem exactly and didn't have a solution exactly required a kind of patience that he had to actively practice. He practiced it. The ethics board filing went in on January 4th, the first business day of the new year. Margaret handled it and sent Nathan a brief factual email. Filed as of 9 a.m. Notification to Calder's legal counsel within 48 hours. Claire is aware. Nathan read the email twice, replied with "thank you," and went back to the quarterly review he was working on. He heard from Claire directly 2 hours later. Not by phone. She appeared in his doorway, which she had never done before. She had done things by email, by scheduled meeting, by the careful professional channels they'd established. She had never simply appeared. He looked up from his screen. She was standing in the doorway with her hands in the pockets of the dark blazer she wore on serious days. Not the gray one she'd had when he first met her, not the navy one, but a new one she'd bought sometime in November, charcoal, well-fitted. She looked like herself. Better than herself. She looked like a version of herself that she'd been working toward for a year. "It's done," she said. "I saw Margaret's email. I wanted to say thank you, in person." She leaned slightly against the doorframe, and I wanted to say it while I was still feeling like saying it, because I have a tendency to talk myself out of things like this. "I know," he said. "You know a lot of things about me for someone who's mostly known me in parks and conference rooms," she said. There was no edge to it. It was just an observation. "You're not hard to know," he said. You're just cautious about being known. She looked at him. Then she said, My lawyer, Margaret, told me I was allowed to be angry, that it didn't disqualify the case. She's right. I know she's right. Claire looked out the window behind his desk at the January sky, which was the particular white of a city that couldn't decide if it wanted to snow. I've been angry for 18 months, and I've been calling it other things. Determination, strategy, moving forward. She looked back at him. It's been anger. Yeah, Nathan said. I'm still angry. Good. Something moved through her face at that, quick, like a crack in something that had been held very tight. You're not going to tell me to let it go? Why would I tell you that? Most people do. They think anger means you're stuck. She shook her head slightly. David used to say I needed to let things go every time I was actually just correct about something. Nathan thought about what he knew of David, the outline of him, the man who had decided he wasn't built for fatherhood and left Emma at 14 months old, a man Claire almost never mentioned except as a structural absence in her and Emma's life. He'd formed a picture of David from the spaces around the things she didn't say. Anger is information, Nathan said. It tells you what matters to you. Letting go is something you do after you've done something with it, not instead of it. She was very still for a moment. Okay, she said quietly. Then, Emma wants to know if Marcus can come for a play date. She has a very specific agenda involving the presentation of evidence that her building blocks are architecturally superior to his. I told her I'd ask. The shift was deliberate, Nathan recognized. She'd reached the edge of something and stepped back from it. He let her. Marcus will take that challenge very seriously, he said. Emma is counting on it. The edge of a smile. Saturday? Saturday works. She straightened from the doorframe. I'll text you. She started to turn, then stopped. And Nathan, for the record, I know what you did. The research James did, the conversation with Donna Park, the way Margaret was already prepared when I walked in. I know none of that happened accidentally. She held his eyes. I'm not going to pretend I don't know. He said nothing. I just want you to know that I know, she said, and that it matters. She paused. Okay. Saturday. She left. Priya appeared approximately 45 seconds later, set a coffee on his desk, and said, I heard nothing, with the perfect neutrality of a person who had heard everything. Thank you, Priya, Nathan said. Of course, she said, and left. The play date happened Saturday afternoon at Claire's apartment, which Nathan had never been to before. It was on the 4th floor of a building in the Westover neighborhood. Not large, but carefully made into something. Emma had a corner of the living room that was entirely hers, a low shelf of books organized by size, a bin of building blocks, a small easel with a half-finished painting that appeared to be either a dog or a cloud, or possibly both. Emma had set up the building blocks before they arrived. Marcus surveyed the situation with the seriousness of a general reading a battlefield. You used a hexagonal base, he said. It's stronger, Emma said. It's more complicated. Stronger is better than simpler, Emma said, with the certainty of a child who has already decided this is a rule. Marcus crouched down to examine the structure at eye level. Okay, he said, in the tone he used when he'd been genuinely impressed but wasn't ready to say so yet. Show me. They disappeared onto the floor, and that was essentially the last coherent sentence either of them directed at an adult for the next 2 hours. Claire made coffee. Her kitchen was small and functional and had a handmade paper calendar on the fridge with Emma's school schedule on it and a drawing taped to the cabinet that appeared to be of a very round dog. Nathan sat at the small kitchen table that was also the only table and watched Claire move around the kitchen with the comfort of someone on her own ground. This is the first time you've been here, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Yeah. I kept the professional wall up pretty firmly. She set 2 mugs on the table and sat down across from him. On purpose. I know. I needed to know the job was real before I let anything else be real. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Does that make sense? It makes complete sense. You never pushed. No. She looked at her coffee. David used to push. Not aggressively, just persistently. Like if he moved things forward fast enough, I wouldn't have time to think about whether I wanted them. She shook her head. I used to think that was romantic. It's easier when things move fast, Nathan said. You don't have to sit with the uncertainty. You're very comfortable with uncertainty. I've had to be. He looked at his mug. When Marcus was 4 and Diane was gone and I had no idea what I was doing, and that was the first time I understood that uncertainty wasn't a problem to be solved. It was just the condition of being a person. He paused. You get better at sitting with it. Or you build walls, Claire said. Or you build walls, he agreed. And then eventually you have to decide whether the wall is protection or just habit. She looked at him directly. Which is this? He didn't look away. I don't know yet. That's an honest answer. It is, she said, and she seemed okay with it. From the living room came the sound of an architectural dispute escalating. Marcus's voice saying, That's not load-bearing, and Emma's voice saying, Yes, it is. Look, followed by a sound that was probably a block tower being restructured rather than collapsed, judging by the absence of the crash. Claire turned to listen, then turned back. She's going to win, she said. He'll claim the result was collaborative. She'll let him. A small smile. Emma's very strategic about letting people save face. She's 5. I know. A fond, tired look. I have no idea where she got it. The afternoon passed the way good afternoons did. Not smoothly, not dramatically, just fully. The kids dismantled and rebuilt 3 different structures and declared the final one a joint achievement with specific credit allocations. Nathan and Claire talked about things that mattered and things that didn't, and didn't keep track of which was which. At 4 o'clock, Emma fell asleep on the couch between one sentence and the next, the way small children do, like a switch being thrown. And Marcus sat quietly with a book Claire lent him and was for once in his life content to be still. Nathan should have left at 5. He left at 6:15 because Claire was in the middle of telling him about the first job she'd ever loved, a small nonprofit she'd worked for in her late 20s, before Emma, before David, an organization that did financial literacy programs for first-generation college students. And he wanted to hear the end of it. The end of it was that the nonprofit had lost its funding and closed, and Claire had been devastated, and she told herself she'd find something with the same purpose again eventually. And then Emma, and then David leaving, and then survival mode, and the eventually had kept getting pushed back. Is that why you went to Calder's firm? Nathan asked. The salary was good enough to feel like you'd earned the delay? She looked at him with the slightly startled expression she got when he'd said something more accurate than she'd prepared for. Yes, she said. That's exactly why. The nonprofit sector is brutal on salaries, he said. It's not a moral failure to need to make money. I know that. But you feel like it was. A little. She looked at Emma, still sleeping, her face relaxed and young and impossible. I feel like if I'd stayed truer to what I actually wanted, I wouldn't have ended up somewhere that... She stopped. You couldn't have known, Nathan said. You took a job at a company that appeared legitimate. The thing that happened to you was done to you. It's not the consequence of a wrong choice. You've told me that before. I'll probably tell you again. Does it stop feeling like my fault eventually? It already isn't your fault. He kept his voice even. The feeling catches up later, but the fact is already true. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked away, and her jaw did the thing it did when she was holding something in, and he let her hold it. He didn't try to take it. Richard Calder got the ethics board notification the following Tuesday. Nathan found out on Wednesday when Margaret called to say that Calder's attorney had reached out requesting a preliminary call to discuss the complaint. This was, Margaret explained, not unusual. It was either an attempt to understand the scope of the filing or an opening move toward a negotiated settlement. Either way, it meant Calder knew the complaint was real and was responding to it like a real threat. What Nathan had not expected was that Calder would also call him personally. The call came to Nathan's direct line on Wednesday afternoon, which meant Calder had that number from somewhere in the professional overlap they'd had over the years. He saw the name on the screen and picked up, because he preferred knowing what he was dealing with. Richard, he said. Nathan. Calder's voice was the voice of a man who had spent decades sounding reasonable at the beginning of conversations. warm, measured, with the specific register of someone who believed that tone could substitute for substance. "I appreciate you taking my call. What can I do for you?" A brief pause, probably not calculated, probably just the half-second of a man who had expected a different opening. "I want to talk about a situation I think has gotten out of hand." "I'm listening." "There's a complaint been filed against me by an employee of yours." He kept the pace slow, unhurried. "I have significant concerns about the accuracy of the claims being made, and I wanted to reach out professional to professional before this goes further." "The ethics board is handling the complaint," Nathan said. "That process is independent of me." "I understand that. I'm also aware that you have significant pull with the people involved." "I don't have pull with the ethics board, Richard. That's the point of an ethics board." A longer pause. "Nathan, I've known you professionally for—" "You've known of me professionally," Nathan said. "That's different." He kept his voice even. "I'm not going to tell you what to do with the complaint. That's between you and your attorney and the board. But I'll tell you this directly. I've seen the documentation, and I know about the other cases, and I don't think this is a situation that resolves itself by calling people." Silence on the line. "She's been filing this because she feels abandoned by the people who should have protected her," Calder said, and his voice had dropped into something quieter, something that was supposed to sound like concern. "I've spoken with former colleagues who say she tends toward—" "Stop," Nathan said. It came out harder than he'd intended, and he didn't soften it. "You're not going to have that conversation with me." More silence. "This is a mistake," Calder said, and now the warmth was gone, just gone, like a switch. "I've been in this industry for a long time, Nathan. A long time. And people who make themselves enemies of established—" "I'm not your enemy," Nathan said. "I'm someone who looked at the evidence and found it credible. What happens next is between you and the board." He paused. "I'd advise you to let your attorney do the talking from here." He ended the call. He sat for 30 seconds, aware of the adrenaline. Not rage, not fear, just the specific physical response to a direct confrontation with someone who had hurt someone he cared about, and he let it move through him and settle. Then he called Margaret and told her about the call. "He'll try other angles," she said, sounding not surprised at all. "I know. Did he threaten you?" "He started to. He stopped himself. Smart enough to know a recorded threat would be worse." She was quiet for a moment. "Don't take any more calls from him directly. Route everything through us." "Agreed. And Nathan," she paused. "Does Claire know he called you?" He thought about it. "Not yet." "Tell her?" Margaret said. "Don't manage the information to protect her from it. She spent 18 months having information managed to keep her off balance." He recognized the correction. "I'll tell her today." He found Claire at her desk, not in a conference room, not in Grayson's team area, just at her own workstation with 3 screens going and a coffee that had gone cold at her elbow. She looked up when he stopped beside her desk. "Can I have 5 minutes?" he said. She read his face and said, "Let me grab my coffee." They went to the small room at the end of the hall, the one with the couch that nobody used and the plant that Priya kept alive out of sheer will. Nathan told her about Calder's call. All of it, including the part where Calder had started to say something about her and Nathan had shut it down. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at the plant. "He's scared," she said finally. "Yes. That's the first time I've ever thought that about him." She said it with the careful interest of someone handling an unfamiliar object. "He's been this fixed thing in my head, this heavy, permanent thing, and now he's making phone calls because he's scared." She looked at Nathan. "That's different." "It is different." "What happens now?" "Margaret works the process. We don't respond to side channels. If he makes any contact with your professional network, we move faster." He paused. "You don't have to do anything except let the process work." She nodded slowly, then, "He said something about me, didn't he? You said you shut it down." Nathan held her eyes. "He started to. I don't know what he was going to say." "I can guess." Her voice was flat, not brittle, just flat, the flatness of someone who has heard enough versions of a thing to know the shape of all of them. "He's been saying I'm unstable, or vindictive, or that this is personal. Probably. Is it personal? She said it like she was genuinely asking herself. It's personal and it's right, Nathan said. Those aren't opposites. She looked at him. He said, Margaret told me you said you wanted this to be about the right thing, not about being angry. She told you it could be both. Yes. She was right, and I'll add one more thing. He kept his voice even, not performing anything, just saying what was true. Being personal doesn't make you less credible. It makes you someone who got hurt and is doing something about it. Those are not the same as having an agenda. Claire looked at him for a long moment. You say things, she said slowly, that I have been trying to say to myself for 18 months and couldn't quite find. Nathan was very aware of how small the room was. You were finding them. You just needed someone else to say them out loud first. Is that what you think this is? What do you think it is? She exhaled, slow, measured, the breath of someone making a decision. I think, she said, that you are the most careful person I have ever met, and that you have been very careful with me, and I have... She stopped, looked at the plant again, looked back. I have not always made it easy. No, he said, you haven't. I know. That's okay. She shook her head slightly, not in disagreement, but in something else. The specific motion of someone reaching the end of a wall they've been walking along and finding that the wall just stops. Nathan, she said. Yeah. She didn't say anything else. She looked at him the way she had looked at the building she'd walked into a year ago, assessing the structural integrity, deciding if it would hold. And then she did something she had not done before. She reached out and put her hand briefly over his. Not a gesture with a meaning attached to it. Not the beginning of something, just contact. Her hand on his for 3 seconds. Then she took it back. Okay, she said quietly. Let Margaret work the process. Let Margaret work the process, he agreed. She stood. She picked up her cold coffee. She left the room. Nathan sat on the unused couch beside the plant that Priya kept alive and looked at the back of his hand. Outside in the hallway, someone was laughing at something. The ordinary afternoon continued. He thought, this is the thing, right here. The thing he hadn't named, hadn't moved toward, hadn't done anything about, because the timing had always been wrong, and Claire had always needed something other than this from him. And now the wall was ending. And he didn't know yet what was on the other side of it, and the uncertainty was enormous and real, and he was, as it turned out, okay with that. He was okay with that. The hand on his had lasted 3 seconds and meant everything and nothing at the same time, and Nathan spent the following week pretending it hadn't happened, which was not dishonest exactly. Nothing had happened, technically, but was also not entirely honest, because something had shifted in the room that afternoon, and they both knew it, and neither of them addressed it directly, which was, Nathan reflected, very much in keeping with how the two of them operated. They were both exceptionally good at not saying things. January moved the way January did in a city that had given up on winter being anything but gray. Cold that wasn't dramatic enough to be interesting, light that arrived late and left early, the general low-grade feeling that the calendar had made a commitment it wasn't prepared to keep. Nathan threw himself into the first quarter with the focus he always brought to the beginning of a year, which was the particular focus of a man who used structure to manage the parts of his inner life that didn't have structure yet. The ethics board process was moving. Margaret gave him updates that were deliberately brief and factual. 2 supporting statements now, not one, both from women who had worked with Calder and been willing, finally, to say so in writing. The board had confirmed receipt and opened a formal inquiry. Calder's legal team had stopped making calls through side channels and was communicating only through official process, which Margaret said meant they'd been told to stop freelancing. Claire knew all of this. Margaret called her directly, as promised, keeping Nathan in a separate lane from the information so that Claire received it as her own news, not filtered through him. It was the right structure, and he appreciated that Margaret had held it without being reminded. What he didn't know, until Sylvia told him on a Thursday morning, was that Claire had been approached by a journalist. He looked up from his screen. When? Tuesday. Someone from a business publication, not one of the major outlets, a mid-tier industry one. They'd heard about the ethics board filing and wanted a comment. Sylvia sat down without being invited. She didn't respond to the initial email. She forwarded it to Margaret instead. Good. Yes. Sylvia paused. She also came to me before she went to Margaret. She wanted to know if responding, not to that reporter, but in general, at some point, would create a problem for the firm. Nathan looked at her. What did you tell her? I told her that her story was hers to tell or not tell, and that the firm's communications team would support whatever she decided, and that she should make the decision based on what she needed, not on what was convenient for us. Sylvia held his gaze steadily. I want you to know I said that. I'm glad you did. I'm telling you because I think she expected me to steer her toward quiet, and I didn't, and I want that on record. Nathan nodded. Thank you. Sylvia stood. She's figuring out that she has options, real ones. That's new for her. A pause at the door. Don't crowd it. He knew what she meant. Don't make her options feel like they depend on him. Don't let his presence, the weight of what he was to her, whatever that was, shrink the space she was learning to move in. I know, he said. Good, Sylvia said, and left, which was becoming her signature move, and Nathan thought that someday he should tell her how much he valued the people in his life who didn't wait for permission to say necessary things. He was thinking about that, about necessity, about permission, when his phone rang at 7:40 on a Friday evening in late January, and it was a number he didn't recognize, and he almost didn't pick up, and then he did, because he always did. Nathan. Claire's voice was different, not her professional voice, not her careful voice, not even her park bench voice. Something else. Thin in a way he hadn't heard before. I'm sorry to call. I know it's late. He was already standing. What happened? I'm at Mercy General. A breath. They brought me in a few hours ago. I'm fine. I didn't want to call, but Emma's with the neighbor and she's okay. And I didn't know who else. What's the room number? Nathan said. A pause. Like she hadn't expected the question to be that simple. I don't know. Ask at the desk. Bennett? Claire Bennett. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Is Emma okay with the neighbor for a while longer? Yes. Mrs. Okafor on the 3rd floor. She has Emma's school bag and her voice caught slightly. She has Emma's things. I was organized. I made sure she had her things. I know you did, Nathan said. 20 minutes. He called Gloria, the night nurse from when Marcus was small, who had become simply a person they trusted and who took calls without complaint. And Gloria said she'd be there in 15 minutes, and Nathan was pulling on his jacket when Marcus appeared in the hallway in his pajamas with his hair sideways. Is something wrong? Marcus said, with the directness of a child who had learned that adults being wrong about things being fine was not worth the comfort. A friend is in the hospital. She's okay. I need to go. Marcus processed this. Is it Emma's mom? Yeah. Marcus nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Tell her Emma's fine. She's going to be worried about Emma. Nathan looked at his son. That's exactly right, he said. I know, Marcus said without pride, just as fact. Gloria's coming? She is. Okay. He turned back down the hall, then stopped. Dad? Yeah? Go fast, Marcus said. Just that. He went back to his room. Nathan went fast. The hospital was the particular controlled chaos of a Friday night in January. Full waiting room, nurses moving at a pace that looked calm and wasn't, the smell that Nathan associated permanently and uncomfortably with the worst phone call of his life. He pushed that association down. It wasn't that. This was different. He found Claire on the 3rd floor in a room that was small and beige and had a monitor that beeped at intervals and a window that looked at a wall. She was sitting up in the bed in a hospital gown, her hair loose, which he had never seen before. She looked, not broken, but stripped, like the controlled, assembled version of herself had been set aside somewhere because she didn't have the resources to maintain it. When she saw him in the doorway, she closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them. You came fast. I said 20 minutes. He came in, pulled the chair close to the bed, and sat down without taking her hand or doing anything she hadn't asked for. He looked at her. What happened? Appendix, she said. It came out with a flat, almost bewildered quality, like she was still processing the indignity of it. I had pain yesterday that I thought was, I don't know what I thought, a pulled muscle. I worked through it. She looked at the monitor. By this morning, it was bad enough that Mrs. Okafor told me I was being stupid and drove me here herself. When's the surgery? Tomorrow morning. They want to do it laparoscopic. It's routine. They said. She stopped, swallowed. They said it's routine. It is routine, Nathan said, not as reassurance, as information. The laparoscopic procedure is standard. Recovery is fast. A week, maybe slightly more before you're fully back. I know, she said. I looked it up on my phone for 3 hours. A pause. I hate hospitals. Most people do. It's not the hospital exactly. It's... She looked at her hands on the blanket. It's being the one who needs something done to them. I'm not good at that. No, Nathan agreed. She looked at him. You're not going to try to make me feel better about it. Would it work? No. Then no. He held her gaze. Marcus said to tell you Emma's fine, and she has her things. He said to make sure I told you that first. Something moved through Claire's face that she didn't catch in time. The specific softness that her daughter produced in her, and apparently that her daughter's best friend's thoughtfulness produced in her, which was not a small thing. He's a good kid, she said quietly. He's his own person, Nathan said. I try not to take credit. She almost smiled. Will you call my sister? Her name is Rachel. She's in Portland. The number's in my phone. I can't... She looked around for her phone. Tell me her last name. Walsh. Rachel Walsh, Portland, Oregon. I'll find it. He stood. I'll step out and call her, and I'll be back in 10 minutes. Can you text Mrs. Okafor to let Emma know you're okay? She doesn't know I'm here. I told her I had a work thing. Emma's 5, Nathan said carefully. I know. The word came out rough. I know she'll be fine with Mrs. Okafor. She loves Mrs. Okafor, and I didn't want her to be scared, and I didn't know how long... She stopped herself. I was trying to manage it. I know. He said it without judgment, because there was none. Text her now. Emma won't be scared if you tell her the truth in your voice. She'll be scared if she figures it out some other way. Claire looked at him. Since when do you know that about my kid? Since I have my own kid, he said. They always know. It's better if it comes from you. She reached for her phone with the careful deliberateness of someone whose abdomen was very unhappy with movement. He watched her type. He didn't offer to help. When she was done, she set the phone down and said, Okay, call Rachel. He stepped into the hallway. Rachel Walsh, Portland, was in Claire's phone under Rach with a star next to it, which told him something about the relationship. He called. Rachel Walsh picked up on the second ring and said, Claire, in the voice of a person who had her sister's calls memorized. Rachel, this is Nathan Holloway. I'm a colleague of Claire's. She's asked me to call you. A beat. Not panic, just recalibration. What happened? Is she okay? He told her. Appendix, surgery tomorrow, routine procedure. Claire was comfortable and had asked him to call. He kept it factual and direct because that was what Rachel Walsh, based on her voice, was going to want. She waited until the evening to call someone, Rachel said. She got here a few hours ago. Of course she did. An exhale that was almost affectionate in its exasperation. She'd wait until they were actively operating to mention it was serious. Another breath. I'm coming up. I can be there by midnight if I leave now. She'd want you to, Nathan said. Room 314. Come to the nurse's station. They'll bring you up. Are you... Rachel paused. Who are you exactly? A colleague? Nathan considered the question with the honesty it deserved. I'm someone she called, he said. A pause. Okay. Something in Rachel's voice had settled, like that answer had told her something the longer answer wouldn't have. Tell her I'm coming. He went back in. He told Claire her sister was coming. Claire's eyes went briefly, helplessly full. which she blinked away with the visible effort of someone who had decided this was not the moment. She didn't have to do that, Claire said. She wanted to. She's going to have to drive 4 hours at night because I have a... She gestured at her midsection with controlled frustration. She's going to drive 4 hours because you're her sister, Nathan said. Let her. Claire pressed her lips together. She looked out the window at the wall. I'm not good at this, she said again, quieter this time. I know. He sat back down. You've said that. I keep saying it because it keeps being true. She looked at the monitor. I've been alone for so long that needing things feels like failing, like proof of something. Proof of what? She was quiet for a moment. That I can't actually do this, any of it, on my own. Nobody does it on their own, Nathan said. That's not a weakness. That's just the actual condition of having a life. You do it on your own. I do it with Gloria and my mother and Priya and Sylvia and Grayson and Marcus's teachers and Benny the security guard who once stayed late because Marcus had a nightmare during a school visit and needed someone to sit with him. He looked at her steadily. Nobody does it alone. We just tell ourselves we do because it's easier than admitting we need the people we need. She looked at him. The stripped quality was still there, but something had changed in it. The kind of shift that happens when a person stops bracing against something. Why did you come? She said. You could have sent someone, or just made sure Rachel was called. You called me, he said. I know, I shouldn't have. Claire. He said her name the way he sometimes did at the park, without professional distance, just her name. You called me because you needed someone. I came because I wanted to. Those are both just facts. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said finally. They sat in the beige room with the beeping monitor until Rachel arrived at 11:47, slightly out of breath from the parking structure, wearing a coat over what appeared to be pajamas because she had not apparently stopped to change. She was shorter than Claire, with the same dark eyes and the same jaw, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at her sister with the specific expression of a sibling who has spent years being frightened by and proud of the same person. You look terrible, Rachel said. Thank you, Claire said. I love you, you absolute menace. Rachel crossed to the bed and hugged her sister carefully, and Claire's eyes closed and her hand came up to hold the back of Rachel's coat, and Nathan looked at the window. After a moment, Rachel straightened and turned to look at Nathan with the frank evaluation of a woman who had been forming a picture of him during a 4-hour drive. Nathan, she said. Rachel. Thank you for calling me. A pause. And for being here. Of course. She studied him for another moment with the specific look of someone who had heard things and was now matching them to a person. Claire's told me about you, she said. Has she? Nathan said, neutral. Not enough, Rachel said, looking at her sister, but some. She sat on the edge of the bed. You should go home. It's almost midnight and I'm here now and she's going to be impossible about sleeping and doesn't need an audience for it. Rachel, Claire said. Am I wrong? A pause. No, Claire admitted. Nathan stood. He looked at Claire. Surgery's at 8. I'll check in after. You don't have to. I know, he said. I will anyway. She held his gaze. Thank you, she said, for coming fast. Marcus's idea, he said. She almost laughed. It didn't quite make it, but it got close. He nodded to Rachel and left. In the elevator going down, he leaned against the wall and let himself be tired for a moment. The particular tired of adrenaline wearing off, of being needed and showing up, and of sitting in a hospital room where the beeping monitor reminded him of other rooms and he hadn't let it stop him. He texted Marcus. She's okay. Rachel is with her. Going home. The response came back in 40 seconds. Good. I left the hall light on. He stood in the elevator and felt something enormous and simple at once. The surgery went smoothly. He knew because Margaret called at 9:15 in the morning, not because she'd been monitoring the situation, but because Rachel had called the office number looking for Nathan's cell, and Priya had relayed the message, which told Nathan that Rachel had his office number from somewhere and hadn't had his cell, which he immediately corrected by texting Rachel directly. Rachel texted back. She's out and annoyed, which means she's fine. Thank you for last night. He was in a meeting when the text came. He read it twice, told himself to put the phone away, and then told Priya to reschedule the 10:30. He went to the hospital at noon with coffee, real coffee, from the place with the mismatched chairs, not the hospital cafeteria, and Claire's laptop, which Rachel had asked him to retrieve from Claire's apartment because Claire had apparently decided she was going to work from the hospital bed, and Rachel had apparently decided to enable this on the grounds that having something to do would make her easier to manage. He understood both positions completely. Claire was sitting up when he came in, looking more like herself. Still pale, still tired, but the assembled quality was back, slightly, like she'd put on a partial version of it just to have something. Rachel was in the chair by the window, with a book. "You brought my laptop," Claire said, as if he'd done something that required explanation. "Rachel asked me to." Rachel, without looking up from her book. "Don't blame me. She said you were going to try to work and that having the laptop was better than you trying to use your phone." "That's true," Claire said. "I have a deck revision due Thursday." "You had appendix surgery this morning," Nathan said. "I know when I had it." She accepted the coffee with both hands and closed her eyes briefly at the smell. "Thank you for this." He sat in the other chair. Rachel made a small sound that was either a cough or a laugh. He didn't look at her. They stayed for an hour. Rachel and Nathan talked, which surprised him. She was dry and funny and clearly loved her sister in the specific way of someone who had watched Claire choose the hard path consistently and found it both admirable and infuriating. She asked him questions that weren't quite personal, but had personal running underneath them. How long had he known Claire? What had she been like when she'd started at the company? Had he noticed? And here she paused, choosing words. How different she seemed now than she probably had a year ago. "She was capable a year ago," Nathan said. "She's confident now." "Those aren't the same thing." Rachel looked at him, then looked at her sister, who was reading something on her laptop with the focused frown of a person doing real work. "No," Rachel said. "They're not." Claire was discharged 2 days later with a list of restrictions that she read thoroughly, and then ranked by how inconvenient they were, which Rachel reported to Nathan via text, with the comment she made an actual ranked list. "I need you to know this." Nathan replied, "That sounds right," and Rachel sent back a laughing emoji, and then a pause, and then, "She's going to be okay, right? Not the surgery. You know what I mean." He stared at the text for a moment. "Yes," he wrote. "She is." "Good," Rachel wrote. "She deserves it. She's been fighting for so long she forgot she's also allowed to just have things." He thought about that for a long time. Rachel went back to Portland on the 4th day, on a morning that Claire described as fine, and Rachel described to Nathan privately as not fine, but necessary, because Claire needs to do the last part herself, and she knows it. They had the specific understanding of sisters who had figured out exactly how much of each other's business they were actually in. Claire worked from home for a week. Nathan did not go to her apartment, which was correct and also cost him something, and he knew Grayson checked in twice about the Thursday deck, and Claire sent it in by Wednesday, because of course she did. What he didn't expect was the phone call on the 8th day. Not a work call, a personal one, to his cell, on a Wednesday evening when he was in the kitchen trying to remember if he'd bought pasta, and Marcus was doing homework at the table with the focused expression of a child who is definitely not actually doing homework. "Hi," Claire said. "Hi." He leaned against the counter. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Really better. Not claiming to be better." A pause. "I've been thinking." He waited. "I've been thinking about what you said in the hospital, about nobody doing it alone." Another pause. "And about what I said about needing things feeling like failing." "I remember." "I don't want to feel that way anymore," she said. "I've been trying to figure out when I started feeling that way, and I think it was a long time before David, even. I think I taught myself that needing things was weakness, because when you're a kid and you need things and they're not there, the alternative is to just decide you don't need them." She said it like she'd been sitting with it for days, which she had. And that works when you're a kid. It stops working at some point. Nathan was looking at Marcus's homework without seeing it. "When does it stop working?" he asked. "When someone keeps showing up," she said, "without being asked, without making you feel like you owe them for it." A breath. You've been doing that for a year. I kept waiting for the part where it became something else, where there was a cost I hadn't read in the contract, and there wasn't one. No, he said. I know that now. A pause. I think I've known it for a while. I just needed to catch up to what I knew. Marcus looked up from his homework, or his non-homework, and looked at his father standing at the kitchen counter with a phone to his ear. His expression was the reading the room expression, the one Nathan had been seeing since Marcus was about 4. Nathan turned slightly toward the window. Claire, he said. Yeah. I need to tell you something. Okay. He looked at the dark backyard, at the oak tree that Marcus had planted with him 3 summers ago from a seed, which was now approximately 2 feet tall and had been the subject of significant optimism from both of them. He thought about park benches and menu cards and cold coffee, and a woman learning to laugh again at something unguarded. I have thought about you almost every day since October, he said. Not as a situation that needed managing, not as someone I was helping, just you. He paused. I want to be clear about that, because I've been careful about being clear with you about things, and this seems like something I should be clear about. The kitchen was very quiet. Marcus had gone completely still at the table. I know, Claire said, and her voice was different. Not thinner, not careful, just real. I've been thinking about you that way too. A breath. I wasn't ready to say it. I'm saying it now. Okay, Nathan said. Okay, she said. So, now we both know. Now we both know. A pause that was not uncomfortable, just full. I should let you get back to whatever you were doing, she said. Marcus is pretending to do homework. She laughed. The real kind, the unguarded one. Tell him the hexagonal base thing works on triangles, too. He can test it when Emma's done being annoyed about being cooped up. I'll tell him. He could hear her smiling in the silence. Good night, Claire. Good night, Nathan. He hung up. He turned around. Marcus was looking at him with the flat, precise gaze of a child who understood everything that had just happened and was currently computing its implications. That was Emma's mom, Marcus said. Yes. Is she better? She's better. Marcus looked at his homework for a moment, then, are things going to get weird? Nathan thought about what he'd said to Marcus months ago, in the kitchen over pancakes, about the park not going anywhere. He thought about how insufficient that had been as a reassurance, and how he hadn't had anything better to offer at the time. He pulled out the chair across from Marcus and sat down. Probably, he said. Things might change. Change is weird sometimes. Marcus looked at him. But weird isn't the same as bad, Nathan said. And I'm not going to do anything that makes things worse for you. That's the actual promise. Not that nothing will change. Just that you matter in whatever happens. Marcus considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Does Emma know? He asked. Not yet. She's going to have opinions. I suspect so. She has opinions about everything, Marcus said, not as a complaint. You like that about her? Marcus made the face of a 7-year-old who finds feelings inconvenient. Maybe, he said. Then quietly, she's my best friend. I know, Nathan said. So it would be good if this didn't mess that up. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure it doesn't. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, with the thorough evaluation he brought to decisions that mattered to him. Nathan didn't look away. He let his son look. Okay, Marcus said finally. He looked back at his homework. I really don't understand this problem. Let me see. Nathan pulled the worksheet toward him. Division with remainders. Okay, so the trick with this one is... They worked on the homework for 40 minutes. The house was warm and the oak tree in the backyard was 2 feet tall. And somewhere across the city, Claire Bennett was sitting in her apartment, feeling better, really better, and Marcus got 4 out of 5 problems right, and was annoyed about the 5th one until Nathan showed him where the calculation had gone sideways, and then he was satisfied in the specific way of a kid who wants to understand the mistake, not just know the answer. The Calder inquiry moved into its next phase in February when the ethics board requested formal statements from both supporting witnesses. Margaret walked Claire through the process with the methodical care that had characterized everything she did, and Claire produced her statement in 3 days, thorough, specific, organized in the same way the notebook had been organized, the way Claire organized everything that mattered to her. Nathan read it once, with her permission, in Margaret's office, while Claire sat across the table and watched him read. When he was done, he looked up. "It's good," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "Both," he said. She nodded. She gathered the papers. She thanked Margaret, and she and Nathan walked out of the building into the February cold, and they stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the specific way of two people who have concluded the official part of the day and are deciding what comes next. "Dinner?" Nathan said. "Not a work dinner. Not a scheduled thing with Sylvia or Grayson present, just the word offered plainly, and the question under it that they both understood." Claire looked at him. "Not tonight," she said. "Emma's home, and I told her I'd be back by 6. "Okay? But—" She looked at him. "Saturday. Not the park. Just us." A pause. "Rachel keeps telling me I'm allowed to have things." "Rachel's right," Nathan said. "I know she is." She met his eyes. "Saturday." "Saturday," he said. She pulled her coat tighter against the February wind and turned toward the parking structure. He watched her go. She turned once at the corner, just enough to look back at him. Then she was gone around the corner, and Nathan stood on the sidewalk in the February cold and felt the specific weight of something that had been moving slowly for a long time, finally beginning to arrive. Saturday came the way things come when you've been waiting for them without admitting you've been waiting. Ordinary and inevitable at the same time. A day that looked exactly like all the other days from the outside and felt entirely different from the inside. Nathan made a reservation at a restaurant that was neither impressive nor casual, just good. The kind of place that had been on the same corner for 15 years and served food that people came back for without needing to take pictures of it. He'd driven past it 100 times and never gone in, which struck him, on the drive over to pick up Claire, as a metaphor he didn't need to examine too closely. He was nervous, which he hadn't expected. He'd built a company from a rented room and 2 employees. He'd navigated a grief so heavy it had changed the shape of his daily life for 2 years. He'd sat across tables from people trying to bankrupt him, discredit him, and buy pieces of him for prices he found insulting, and he'd done all of it with reasonable composure. The idea that he would be nervous picking up a woman he'd known for almost a year was, rationally, absurd. He was nervous anyway. He sat in front of her building for 2 minutes before going up, which he knew because he looked at the clock and told himself to stop looking at the clock. And when he finally went up and knocked on her door, she opened it already wearing her coat, like she'd been ready for a while and had also been waiting. She looked like herself, but like herself on purpose. Dark green dress under the coat, small earrings, hair down. Not dressed up in the way that meant trying, just in the way that meant she'd made a decision about the evening and committed to it. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. From somewhere behind her, Emma's voice came, "Is that Nathan? Tell him Marcus says hexagons are structural, and I want to discuss it." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "She's been saving that." "I'll tell him," Nathan said. "Mrs. Okafor's coming at 7, Claire told the room behind her, and Emma said, "I know," and then appeared in the hallway at approximately knee-height, wearing a shirt with a dog on it and the serious expression of a child with a genuine agenda. "Tell Marcus," Emma said to Nathan, with the gravity of a diplomat delivering a formal communication, "that I built a hexagonal base out of the couch cushions and it held 4 books." "That's impressive," Nathan said. "4 heavy books," Emma said. "Tell him." "I'll tell him exactly that." Emma studied him for a moment with the thorough, fearless assessment of a 5-year-old who had not yet learned to be subtle about looking at people. Then she seemed to reach a conclusion and went back to whatever she'd been doing. Claire was watching her daughter with the expression that Nathan had spent months recognizing and still hadn't fully gotten used to. The one that was all the things she was, compressed into something that had no words. "She approves," Claire said quietly. "Of hexagons." "Of you." She picked up her bag. "She told me last week that you're one of the people she likes because you don't talk to her like she's little." Nathan thought about Emma, who was 5 going on 45 and had opinions on structural engineering. "She's not little," he said. "No," Claire said. "She's really not." They went to dinner. The restaurant was good in exactly the way Nathan had expected. Warm without being precious. The kind of noise level where you could talk and be heard. They were given a corner table without his asking, which might have been luck and might have been the hostess reading the situation, and they sat across from each other with the menus and the slight formality of a first real date that was also, in every way that mattered, not a first anything. "This is strange," Claire said, looking at her menu. "Which part?" "I know you very well, and I've never had dinner with you." She set the menu down. "I know you read reports starting from the last page backward. I know you drink your coffee too fast and then complain it's cold. I know you save Marcus's drawings in the left drawer of your desk, and you think no one has noticed." She met his eyes. "And I've never had dinner with you." "I noticed you save Emma's drawings in the front pocket of your laptop bag," he said, "and fold the corners so they don't crease." She blinked. "When did you see that?" "Conference room B, the plant." A pause. Then she laughed. The real kind, the one that came from somewhere unguarded. "We've been paying attention." "For a while," he agreed. They ordered, they talked, not about work, not about Calder, not about the ethics board or the legal process or anything with a case number attached to it. They talked about his mother in Phoenix, who grew tomatoes with a commitment that bordered on competitive sport and had never, in 20 years of attempting, successfully grown a pepper. They talked about how Claire had come to the city in the first place, following a job opportunity at 26, intending to stay 2 years, and had instead stayed because the city had a specific quality at the end of summer, the light in August, the particular temperature of the evenings, that she'd never been able to explain to anyone from somewhere else, and had also never been able to leave. Nathan understood this. He'd grown up here. He'd never had to explain why he'd stayed because leaving had never genuinely occurred to him. "Did you always want to build a company?" Claire asked, at some point between the first course and the second. "I wanted to build something," he said. The company was the shape the building took. He turned his glass slowly. "When you grow up without much, you spend a lot of time thinking about what security actually looks like. I thought for a long time it was money. It's not money." "What is it?" "Having people you trust in the room with you," he said. "Having work that matters to you. Having somewhere to go home to that's actually home." He paused. "It took me an embarrassingly long time to understand that." "You're 32, Claire said. That's not embarrassingly long. I know people who figured it out at 25. I know people who haven't figured it out at 50. She met his eyes. "We figure things out when we figure them out. The timeline is personal." He looked at her. "You're much more generous about that than you are about yourself." She didn't look away. "I'm working on it." The evening moved the way good evenings move. Not quickly, not slowly, just at its own pace, the way a conversation does when neither person is watching the clock or managing the impression they're making. There was a moment, somewhere near the end of dinner, when Claire was talking about the nonprofit she'd loved in her late 20s, the financial literacy program that had lost its funding, and she said, "I never really let go of what that work was." And Nathan said, "You shouldn't have to let go of it." And she looked at him with the question already forming. "After everything settles," he said carefully, "Holloway Consulting has a community investment arm that we've been building out. It's small, it's underdeveloped, it doesn't have the right leadership. We've been looking for someone with genuine experience in financial education and the organizational capability to build a program from the ground up." He paused. "I'm not offering you a job. I'm telling you the thing exists in case you want to know about it someday." Claire was quiet for a moment. She turned her water glass slowly, the same gesture he'd just made without noticing they'd mirrored each other. "After everything settles," she said, "whenever that is. And this isn't," she searched for the word, "this isn't connected to tonight. Tonight is tonight," he said. "The professional thing is the professional thing. They don't negotiate with each other." She held his gaze. "You're very careful about keeping those separate." "I had a good HR director explain to me early on why that mattered," he said, "and I've watched what happens when people don't." "Calder," she said, "among others." He leaned forward slightly. "What you build professionally has to be yours, not because of me. Not sustained by me. Yours because you built it. She looked at him for a long moment, and in her eyes there was something that had been tightly coiled for as long as he'd known her slowly beginning, finally, to release. I believe you, she said, and the way she said it meant completely, which she hadn't said to anyone in a long time, and she was saying it now. They walked after dinner. The February night was cold and clear in the specific way that makes a city look like itself. The lights on the water, the particular geometry of buildings against a dark sky. They walked without deciding where, which Nathan couldn't remember the last time he'd done, just walked and talked and occasionally didn't talk, and at some point he reached for her hand and she let him take it, and they kept walking. It was not a dramatic moment. Nobody would make a movie of it. A man and a woman walking along the riverside on a cold February night, both of them slightly imperfect and carrying things, both of them learning how to put some of those things down. But it was real, and it was theirs, and those two things were enough. The Ethics Board issued its formal findings in March, on a Tuesday, in the language of institutional documents, which was deliberate and understated and nonetheless entirely clear. The board found Richard Calder's conduct, across 3 documented cases, with supporting statements from 2 former employees and a comprehensive evidentiary record compiled primarily by Claire, augmented by James Chen's research, to constitute systematic violations of professional conduct standards. His membership in the Industry Association was suspended pending a full disciplinary review. The findings were a matter of public record, which meant they were searchable, which meant that anyone who heard his name and looked would find them. It was not a criminal prosecution. It was not a complete accounting of everything he had done. The 2 women who had settled under NDA could not speak publicly, and that limitation was real, and Claire understood it and felt it, the knowledge that 2 people's stories would stay half told because of agreements signed years ago when they'd had no other options. But what had happened to Claire was documented, on the record, permanent. Her name was attached to a finding that said, she told the truth. Margaret called her at 9 that morning, and Claire called Nathan at 9:15. It's done, she said. The same word she'd used in January when the filing went in, but her voice was entirely different now. Not tight, not controlled, just real. It's actually done. I know, Nathan said. Margaret called me too. I don't know what I expected to feel. A pause. I thought I'd feel bigger, like something exploded or resolved or... I don't know, it's quieter than I thought. Big things usually are, Nathan said. The movies get that wrong. Yeah. A breath. I'm at my desk. I should go back to the Harmon proposal. Probably. I just wanted to tell you directly. I know. He paused. Claire. Yeah. How do you actually feel? Silence for a moment. Like I can stop listening for him behind me, she said quietly. That's what it feels like I can stop checking over my shoulder. Good, Nathan said. Yeah, she said. It really is. She went back to the Harmon proposal. Nathan sat at his desk and looked out at the March sky, which had finally made up its mind to be spring, and thought about what it meant to be done listening for something that had been there for so long it had become part of the ambient noise of a person's life. He thought it probably took time. Even when the thing was gone, you kept listening for a while. The nervous system didn't get the memo as fast as the mind did, but eventually the checking stopped. Eventually the listening found nothing, enough times that it started to believe in the quiet. He hoped that for her. He believed it was coming. Thomas Grayson knocked on his doorframe that afternoon. Have you seen the Harmon proposal Claire sent over? Grayson said. Not yet. She restructured the entire risk analysis section, and it's better than what I had. He said this with the flat certainty of a man who was comfortable acknowledging when someone on his team had outperformed him, which was one of the things Nathan had always valued in Grayson. I want to talk to you about a senior role on the team. She's been doing senior work for months. Have you talked to her about it? I wanted to flag it with you first. Nathan shook his head. Talk to her first. It's her decision. Then we can structure the conversation about title and compensation. Grayson looked at him. You always do that. What? Send me back to the person. He leaned on the doorframe. Most people at your level talk about staff like they're pieces on a board. They're not pieces on a board, Nathan said. They're the reason the board is worth anything. Grayson was quiet for a moment. I'll talk to her, he said. He started to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, and I'm only saying this once, so pay attention, you did right by her. When you brought her in, whatever that was about, whatever it is now. He looked at Nathan with the directness that had always characterized him. You did right by her. He left before Nathan could respond, which was probably intentional because Grayson was also one of those people who said necessary things and then didn't wait around to be thanked for them. Nathan turned back to the window. Spring was arriving in the way it arrived here, tentatively, like it wasn't sure yet how committed it was prepared to be. The trees along the street below were starting to consider their options. He thought about what Marcus had said in the car, months ago. I don't want things to get weird. Things had gotten complicated. Not weird, complicated, which was different. Complicated meant you had to hold multiple true things at once, a professional relationship and a personal one, 2 children who were best friends, and 2 adults figuring out what they were to each other, a past that had left marks, and a present that was asking them both to be braver than their damage had taught them to be. Complicated was not the same as wrong. It was the Saturday in April, 3 weeks after the ethics board decision, that Nathan understood something he'd been circling for months. They were at the park. It was the first genuinely warm Saturday of the year, the kind of day that made the whole city come outside with the slightly stunned quality of people who hadn't quite believed in warmth until they felt it again. The oak tree was full of new leaves. Marcus had gotten his permanent front tooth finally, which had changed his face in a way that was still catching Nathan off guard. Still his son, but incrementally less the boy he'd been a year ago, incrementally more the person he was becoming. Emma had grown too. Not dramatically. Children grew the way things grew, continuously and invisibly, until you noticed it all at once. But she was taller, and her vocabulary had added several words of disputed origin that Claire was addressing with varying success. And she'd started at a new preschool in February that she'd been resistant about and had then decided, on her own timeline, was acceptable. They were in the sandpit. Marcus was building something that he'd described as an aqueduct, which he'd learned about in school and found remarkable. And Emma was providing structural consultation that Marcus was accepting with more grace than he would have 6 months ago. Nathan and Claire were on the bench. The bench, their bench, with the slightly uneven left leg that Nathan had meant to report to the Parks Department and never had. Grayson talked to me, Claire said. She wasn't looking at him, watching the kids. I heard, Nathan said. What did you think? I told him I needed a week to consider it. That seems right? He seemed surprised I didn't say yes immediately. She glanced at Nathan sideways. I think he expected gratitude to be faster than thought. That's Grayson's one blind spot, Nathan said. He values people correctly and then assumes they'll process it at his pace. Claire smiled slightly. I'm going to say yes. I thought you would. But I needed the week to make sure it was yes because I wanted it, not yes because I felt like I should want it. She looked back at the kids. There's a difference. There is, he said. They sat with that for a moment. I've been thinking about the community program, she said. The financial literacy piece. I thought you might be. Not yet. Not until I've been in the senior role long enough to know it's mine. She paused. But eventually. Whenever you're ready, Nathan said. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that she'd clearly been thinking about for more than this morning. I spent a lot of time telling myself I just needed to get stable, get financially stable, get Emma stable, get professionally stable. Like stability was the goal, and everything else came after. She watched Emma redirect Marcus's aqueduct with one firm suggestion and Marcus's consideration of it. But stability isn't the ceiling. I think I made it the ceiling. What's the ceiling? He asked. She was quiet for long enough that he didn't rush it. Having something that's actually mine, she said. Not surviving, not managing, actually having. She turned to look at him. That sounds obvious. It's not obvious when you've been in survival mode, he said. When you're in it, having is a luxury. Surviving is the whole job. And then the surviving works, and you forget to switch modes. She shook her head slowly. Emma's the one who told me. Emma told you? She said, we were at breakfast last month and she said, Mama, you look happy today. You should look happy more. Claire's voice did something complicated for a moment. She was eating cereal, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Nathan looked at the aqueduct, which was progressing significantly under joint management. Kids are honest about the things adults learn to be diplomatic about, he said. She wasn't diplomatic, she was... Claire stopped. She was right, and she said it without an agenda, just as information. She paused. I didn't realize how much I'd been performing okay for her until she said I actually looked it. There was a version of this moment that would have been a good place for Nathan to say something wise, something that wrapped the observation up cleanly. He didn't. He sat with it, because some things didn't need a response, just acknowledgement. After a while, he said, My mother called last Sunday. She calls every Sunday at 9. She asked about you directly this time, by name. Claire turned to look at him. What did you tell her? I told her you were doing well. A pause. She said that was nice, and then asked when she was going to meet you. Claire held his gaze. What did you say? I said soon, he said, if you were okay with that. She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched something in her face move through the last of its processing, the final check, the last pass of the wariness that had been there for so long it had become part of her expression, the residue of a woman who had learned the hard way that good things could be instruments, that warmth could precede a request. She seemed to arrive, finally, at the conclusion that had been building for a year, that some things are exactly what they appear to be, that a man can show up without wanting something in return, can be consistent not because he's calculated what consistency costs and found it acceptable, but because it's simply who he is. Soon sounds good, Claire said. Nathan nodded. He looked back at the sandpit. The aqueduct appeared to be working. Marcus had diverted a small amount of water from a dribbled bottle into the channel, and it was moving, slowly, imperfectly, finding its way through the structure by process of gravity and whatever adjustments Emma was making at the receiving end. It actually works, Nathan said, surprised. She widened the channel on her end, Claire said. I watched her do it while you were talking. He doesn't know she fixed it. Should we tell him? He'll figure it out. She watched her daughter pat the sand into shape with the quiet satisfaction of someone who solved problems without needing credit for them. She does that, fixes things without making it a thing. 5 years old, Nathan said. I know. The pride and the tiredness and the love all present at once in her voice, the mixture that was what parenthood actually sounded like when nobody was performing it. She got that from somewhere. He looked at Claire. Yeah, he said. She did. Nathan Holloway proposed on an evening in October, 14 months after the afternoon he'd first watched a woman leave a restaurant without eating. He had not planned it the way things got planned in movies. No restaurant with a private room, no orchestrated moment, no ring hidden in dessert. He had thought about it for a long time and concluded that what he knew about Claire made the orchestration wrong, that what she would want, what would mean something to her specifically, was not a performance but a true thing said plainly. They were at his house. Marcus was in bed. Emma was asleep on the couch under the blanket she'd claimed as hers over the course of 6 months of sleepovers, her face as young as gravity and sleep, the worry she didn't know she carried released for the night. The dishes from dinner were done. The house was quiet in the way it got on autumn evenings when everyone in it had eaten and was warm and accounted for. Claire was at the kitchen table with a book she wasn't reading, the same way she sometimes sat with a book when her mind was somewhere else, and Nathan sat across from her with his coffee, and after a while he set the coffee down. I want to marry you, he said. She looked up, not startled. She'd heard him. She was just looking at him to make sure she'd heard what she thought she heard. I've thought about it for a long time, he said, and I'm not good at not saying true things when I know they're true, so I'm saying it. I want to marry you. I want to do this. He gestured at the kitchen, at the table, at the blanket-covered kid on the couch visible through the doorway, as something we do together, as the actual structure of our lives. He paused. You don't have to answer now. I just needed to say it while it was true. Claire set the book down. She looked at him for a long moment with the full evaluating attention that he had come to know was not uncertainty but honesty. She did not spend it to be polite. She spent it on things that deserved it. "I'm still learning to have things," she said. "I know. I'm still—" She stopped. Started again. "There are mornings where I wake up and check whether Emma's okay, and whether the rent is covered, and whether my job is still real, and I have to remind myself that the answer to all of those is yes, and has been yes for a long time." She looked at her hands on the table. "I'm still catching up to the yes." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be caught up. I'm asking if you want to catch up with me instead of by yourself." She looked at him. "I'm not perfect at this," she said. "I'm not going to be. I'm going to close off sometimes and take too long to ask for things and be stubborn about problems I should let someone help me with." "I know," he said for the third time. "You know," she said, "I've been paying attention for a year," he said. "Those aren't surprises. Those are just you." The kitchen was quiet. From the living room came Emma's small sleeping sounds. From upstairs, silence, which was Marcus sleeping, which was the particular silence of a child whose body had spent the day fully and was now completely checked out. Claire looked at Nathan with her whole face, nothing managed, nothing assembled. "Yes," she said, "simple, just that." He reached across the table and she took his hand. They sat there for a while in the kitchen, in the quiet, without making it into something more than it was. Two people who had been broken by different things, who had found each other in the ordinary sideways way that real things happened, and who had said yes to the difficulty and the complication and the full realness of trying to build something with another human being. Nathan had a ring. He'd bought it 2 weeks earlier. Nothing enormous, nothing that made a statement, a thing she could wear to work without it feeling like a costume. He'd had it in his jacket pocket since Thursday. He went and got it from his jacket. He came back and set it on the table. Claire looked at it, picked it up, turned it in the light. "It doesn't have an inscription," she said. "I thought you'd want to choose it." She looked at him over the ring. "That's either very thoughtful or you ran out of ideas." "Both," he said. She put it on. She looked at her hand the way people did in the first moment, still getting used to the new fact of it. "It fits," she said. "I borrowed one of your rings to size it," he said, "from the dish on your dresser. Rachel helped." Claire's eyes went slightly wide. Rachel knew. For 3 weeks, she was extremely difficult to swear to secrecy. "I cannot believe she—" Claire started laughing. The real kind, fully unguarded, the one that had taken months to arrive and now arrived easily. "She asked me last week if I was happy, completely out of nowhere, just called and asked if I was happy." "What did you say?" "I said yes." The laughter quieted into something softer. "I said yes, and I meant it, and she said good and changed the subject. And I didn't know why." She shook her head, still smiling. "Rachel." Nathan looked at her, across his kitchen table, in the house that had been too big and quiet for 3 years, with a ring on her finger and a laugh still in her voice, and someone else's kid asleep on his couch, and his son upstairs who had, in his own 7-year-old way, been preparing for this since he'd first decided Emma's mom was good at math. He thought about what it had taken to get here. Not the legal process, not the professional navigation, not the Calder situation, though all of those were real. He meant the other kind of distance, the kind you covered not in miles but in willingness. The incremental daily decision to remain open to another person's reality, to not let your history shrink what the present was allowed to be. He had not always been good at that. After Diane, he had been efficient at grief and bad at need, which was a specific failure mode he'd spent time understanding with a therapist he still saw twice a month in a small office on Maple Street. He had used his ability to function as an argument that he was fine for longer than was true. Claire had done something similar with different architecture, used her capability as a wall between herself and anything that might require her to trust it. They had both, separately, become expert at surviving in ways that made vulnerability look optional. It was not optional. That was the thing neither of them had been able to learn alone. You could do it alone for a while. You could be capable and functional and provide for the people who depended on you. You could rebuild your professional life and secure a safe apartment and prove to yourself that you were not the story someone else told about you. All of that was real and mattered and was genuinely hard. But eventually the surviving was done, and what was left was the question of what you did with the life you'd saved. You couldn't answer that question alone either. They told the kids on Sunday morning Marcus had already intuited something. He'd been reading Nathan's silences for years and had developed an accuracy that would have been impressive in an adult. But Emma had not, and so when Claire sat on the floor of Nathan's living room with Emma in her lap and said, "Emma, I have something to tell you," Emma stopped what she was doing and gave her mother the full attention she deployed for things she understood to be important. Claire showed her the ring. Emma looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Nathan, then at Marcus, who was sitting very still on the couch with the expression of someone who has finished processing and arrived somewhere. "Does this mean," Emma said carefully, "that we're going to live here?" "We're going to figure that out," Claire said. "It means Nathan and I are going to get married, and we're going to make a plan together, a real one, and you and Marcus are going to be part of what we plan." Emma considered this. "Is Marcus going to be my brother?" she said. Marcus looked at Emma. His expression was the face he made when he was genuinely uncertain about something but didn't want to show it, which Nathan recognized as the face he himself made in board meetings. "I could be," Marcus said, "if you want." Emma looked at him with the thorough assessment she'd given Nathan in the doorway 7 months ago. "You still owe me a discussion about hexagons," she said. "I know," Marcus said. "Okay," Emma said. "Then, yes." Marcus nodded with the gravity of a concluded negotiation. Nathan looked at Claire. Claire looked at Nathan. Neither of them said anything, but something moved between them that was partly laughter and partly something too large and complicated for laughter. Emma climbed off Claire's lap and went to Marcus on the couch, and Marcus shifted over to make room without being asked, and Emma sat beside him and they resumed whatever they'd been doing with the complete adaptability of children, who absorb enormous changes and immediately continue being themselves. Nathan's mother came to visit in November, as she did every Thanksgiving, and the house had more people in it than it had ever had during her visits. Rachel driving up from Portland, Marcus's energy filling every room, Emma, who had decided within 12 minutes of meeting Nathan's mother that she was a reliable source of baked goods, and had adjusted her position accordingly. His mother pulled Nathan into the kitchen on the first evening, which was where she had all her important conversations, the kitchen being the room she trusted. "She's good," his mother said, without preamble. "I know," Nathan said. "She's real." His mother said it with the precision of someone who understood the difference. "Not performed. She gets tired, and she gets quiet, and she doesn't turn it on for me just because I'm your mother." "No," Nathan said. "She doesn't do that." "Good." His mother picked up a dish towel and then put it down again without using it, which was something she did when she was actually trying to say something else. "You seem like yourself again." Nathan looked at his mother. She was 71, with the particular quality of a woman who had raised her son alone through circumstances that had required her to be harder than she'd wanted to be, and who had spent the last decade slowly allowing herself to be softer now that the hardness had done its job. "I'm better than myself," he said. His mother looked at him. Her eyes did what they did sometimes, the thing she'd never quite managed to stop, the involuntary honest response to something that mattered. "Good," she said, for the second time. She picked up the dish towel again, this time with purpose. "Go back in there. That woman is running interference on Rachel, who has had 2 glasses of wine and is telling the story about the parking lot, and someone needs to stop that." "What story about the parking lot?" "I don't know. I'm afraid to find out." She turned back to the counter. "Go." He went. The wedding was in April the following year. Not large. Neither of them had wanted large. 40 people in the backyard of a friend's property outside the city, on a day that was cold in the morning and warm by the afternoon, in the unpredictable way of April, which was appropriate, Nathan thought, for 2 people who had learned to be okay with things that couldn't be fully predicted. Marcus stood next to Nathan. Emma stood next to Claire. Emma was wearing a yellow dress that she had selected with complete certainty and which had not been argued with by anyone who valued their time. She carried a small bunch of flowers that she'd assembled herself from options provided, with the focused artistry of a child who took aesthetic decisions seriously. The ceremony was short and real. Not scripted to performance, they'd both resisted the language that turned weddings into theater, the invocations of perfect love and effortless partnership. What they'd written instead was plain and honest and didn't promise anything that wasn't true. Claire said, "I am not easy to know, and you learned me anyway. I am not easy to love, and you didn't find that a problem. I spent a long time making walls, and you sat outside them without asking me to take them down. I want to spend the rest of my life being someone who deserved that patience." Nathan said, "I watched you put a menu card back in its stand when you thought no one was looking. You were careful even when it cost you something. You have been careful with everything that mattered: your daughter, your work, your word, your heart. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that carefulness." Emma cried during this, which surprised everyone, including Emma, who had not anticipated it and was briefly furious at herself about it before deciding it was acceptable. Marcus handed her his folded handkerchief, which he had brought specifically because Nathan had told him it was the kind of thing worth being prepared for, and Emma took it and used it and kept it, and Marcus counted this as a fair trade. Afterward, there was food and music, and Rachel giving a toast that was funny and true and made Claire laugh until she couldn't see, and Nathan's mother dancing with Emma, who had decided this was the best day she could remember, and Marcus falling asleep on a chair at 9 o'clock with his tie loosened and his shoes off, perfectly comfortable with having been fully present for something important and now being fully done. Nathan found Claire at the edge of the yard, near the fence where the flowering trees were doing what April trees did, committing fully to the idea of bloom after a long, cold wait. She was just standing there, looking at them. He went and stood beside her. "Okay?" he asked. "Better than okay," she said. She shook her head slightly. "I'm thinking about a year ago, what I thought my life was going to be." "What did you think it was going to be?" "Smaller," she said. "I thought it was going to be smaller." She turned to look at him. "I thought I'd used up the big things." He thought about the 22-year-old version of himself in a rented office with 2 employees and a belief that felt like arrogance, but was actually just a refusal to accept the ceiling he'd been given. He thought about Marcus at 7, handing Emma a handkerchief he'd thought to bring. He thought about a menu card placed neatly back in its stand by a woman who insisted on small dignities even when larger ones had failed her. "Nobody uses up the big things," he said. "We just forget that sometimes, when we're trying to survive." Claire took his hand. She looked back at the trees. "I want to do the community program," she said. "The financial literacy piece." "I'm ready." "Tell me what you need," he said. "Time, resources, someone to leave me alone while I build it and trust that I know what I'm doing." "Done," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder briefly, the gesture of someone who had finally stopped keeping their balance so tensely. In the following years, and there were many of them, ordinary and full in the way of real lives, not continuous dramatic arcs, but the accumulating texture of Tuesday mornings and arguments about whose turn it was, and school pickups, and medical appointments, and dinners that burned, and dinners that were perfect, and seasons changing, and children growing into people you couldn't quite believe you knew. They built the program. Claire built it, precisely. A financial education initiative embedded in community centers across 3 neighborhoods, serving families that looked the way her family had looked 5 years earlier. The curriculum she designed was clear and practical, and treated its participants as capable of understanding their own financial lives, which was not always how financial education was approached, and made a difference that showed up in the numbers and in the faces of people who left the sessions with something they hadn't had when they came in. Nathan helped when asked and stepped back when not asked, and learned, over time, the specific art of supporting someone's work without making it his own. Emma, at 7, declared the program for people who need to know the math, which was accurate and which Claire put on the internal newsletter in a box at the top, attributed to E. Holloway, age 7, because her daughter was right and deserved credit. Marcus, at 9, developed an interest in urban planning that had clear roots in the aqueduct experiment, and which Nathan encouraged with the specific parental wisdom of a man who had learned not to put his own destinations on his child's map. Rachel visited often and stayed too long and was entirely welcome. Nathan's mother grew tomatoes and still could not grow peppers, and one Thanksgiving admitted she'd been attempting roses, which explained a lot. There were hard things. There were seasons that were difficult for reasons that had nothing to do with Calder or the past, just the ordinary difficulty of two people with histories and children and jobs and the daily negotiation of what it meant to be a family built from separate lives. They were not always graceful about it. There were arguments that went longer than they should have, and silences that needed to be broken, and apologies that took longer to arrive than was ideal. Neither of them was the finished version of themselves. Neither of them ever would be. But they stayed in the room. They said the true things, even the uncomfortable ones. They kept choosing each other in the ordinary daily way that no one made movies about, not in a grand gesture, just in the persistence of showing up. On a Tuesday in late September, a few years after the wedding, Nathan walked past a cafe on the riverside. A different one from Riverside Terrace, smaller, with outdoor tables that were almost too cold for the season, and saw a woman sitting alone at a table with a menu, doing the math behind her eyes. He stopped. He bought a coffee. He sat at the table beside hers. He didn't speak immediately. After a few minutes, she looked up, defensive, waiting for whatever this was going to be. "The soup is good," he said, "and the price is reasonable. I've eaten here before." She looked at him, looked at the menu, looked back at him. "You don't know what I was thinking," she said. "No," he said, "but the soup is genuinely good, and the price is on the lower part of the board." She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at the menu again, at the lower part of the board. She ordered the soup. He finished his coffee. He left. He called Claire on the walk back to the office and told her about it, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Did she take it?" "She ordered the soup," he said. A pause. "Good," Claire said. "That's good, Nathan." "Yeah," he said. He walked back through the October city, past the corner where the nonprofit had its office, past the oak tree in the park that he and Marcus had planted from a seed and which was now tall enough to actually be a tree, past the restaurant where 40 people had eaten dinner at their wedding in April, and the waitstaff had let Marcus sleep in the back room in his loosened tie. Past the things that had become his life by being chosen, one small decision at a time. Nathan Holloway had learned, at the cost of real things, that dignity mattered more than rescue. That help given without the expectation of return was not weakness or foolishness, but the only kind worth giving. That the people who stayed when things were difficult were not the rare ones. They were the real ones, and the work of a life was learning to recognize them. And that sometimes the most important thing you could do for another person was not to fix what was broken, but to sit beside them while they fixed it themselves, and to make sure they knew you'd still be there when they were done. He had opened a door. She had chosen to walk through it, and they had spent the years since holding that door open for anyone who needed it, because that was what you did with the things that had saved you. You turned them outward, and you kept turning, and the door stayed open, and the light went both ways.